Good morning. This is a called meeting of the Forsyth County Finance Committee. The members are Commissioners Cooper, Mills, Brown, CFO Dave Gruen, and I'm Eric Johnson, the County Manager. This is being live streamed on YouTube. And just a couple of announcements to start. This is a public meeting, so the public is welcome to call in. If the members of the public speak, we'll ask them to stop because this is not a public hearing. It is a meeting for the 5 city members and those who are participating today in the discussion of their budgets. If anyone from the public continues to speak after being asked not to speak, we do have the ability to mute them, but it's certainly our hope that that's not necessary. But I just want to get that on the record at the beginning of the meeting. So the first thing is calling the meeting to order. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda for today's meeting?
So moved.
Second. Well, I want to discuss adding an item.
Yeah.
I want to ask if you think that these are broad enough that we can discuss within them the amount we're budgeting to, because that's very important. I mean, I know it's important to some of us on the board of what the amount that you're budgeting and the amount that we are thinking we should be budgeting to, and there could be a disagreement there.
Certainly. Dave, do you want to talk about the fact that the agenda that was published has an afternoon session, and I believe that you've rescheduled some of those. So before we adopt the agenda, I think we're going to need to amend it.
So I'll remove my second.
Okay, well, the one we posted.
Dennis needs to remove his first.
Yeah, the one we posted, I think, is the one before you, the one that we posted within 24 hours, because we were working on adjusting that other agenda. So I think we're okay, unless staff lets me know that this is not the posted agenda. But
okay,
I think it was broad enough to start with anyway, and I think we can make those changes.
Okay.
So you don't think we need to add an item?
Well, I think to the commissioner's point, which is a good one, we do have a spot in the beginning there to talk about an overview of the budget in general, and we'll work off of the front page of the summary for the general fund I gave you all. And that works out well to whatever number the committee wants to budget to, because what's on there is just a starting point. We have not set a number to budget to, if you will. So to me, I think that's within the agenda for budget review.
And for
Okay, thank you.
Organizations that we're talking about, there's every opportunity in terms of the level of funding.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, if we go back to, and I apologize, I was looking at what was sent out a week ago, so sorry, Dave.
It's okay.
So with that, I'll entertain a motion for the adoption of the agenda as published yesterday.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Unanimous. Okay, the next item would be the adoption of the minutes from the September 3rd, 2019 meeting. That was the last meeting of the Finance Committee, and that was distributed last week. Any questions or changes anyone would like to make?
I make a motion we adopt the minutes as presented.
Thank you. Okay, we have a second, Dennis Brown, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous. Thank you. So this is the kickoff on the 2021 budget, and we're dealing with the first phase of that starting today, which is the general fund. So we won't be talking about some of the other funding sources that come later in the process. There is no 21 budget at this point. We're going to have a presentation by Dave, who's going to go through talking about the best understanding that we have today as to potential revenues for next year, and looking at the packet that Finance sent. There's different scenarios for some of the major components. And we're going to start talking about both how the economy has impacted the budget, and then get into a discussion of several of our elected officials who are all present at this time or represented at this time. So That's just the introduction. I think that from my perspective, the budget isn't anticipated to be adopted before October. And we're very early into understanding the implications that COVID has and the recession that it's triggered. And so I just think from my perspective, there's reason to be cautious about making decisions too early when the full impact is not going to be known for the next few months. But certainly there's the opportunity to have a budget set up and revisited before the board adopts it in October. And of course, the budget doesn't take effect until January. So there's still the opportunity that the board in January can revisit. And if you want to hold off on decisions, you can hold off on some decisions until January, and there's probably not much of an impact on the ability for things to get started in 21. But it's an unusual situation in that we have just barely started, I think, to see the economic impacts of the recession. And so the longer that you hold off on some decisions, the more certain some of those decisions might be. But it doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to start to lay out a framework for a budget now. You just have the opportunity to revisit it as we go through. And I'm really talking to the three commissioners who are 3 of the 5 that ultimately make that final decision on the budget. So with that as an introduction, unless anyone has any comments they'd like to make at this point, we'll have Dave just talk about kind of where we are, and then we'll get into the actual organizational budgets.
Okay, and I can do the 2 things, just where the starting point is that we see, and we will address too the potential from the COVID impact at the same time by seeing a couple of our major revenues. If staff can bring that document up on the screen, that would be good. But if not, I'll draw the attention of the committee to the summary document, which we sent out again this morning. It's titled General Fund Summary, Fiscal Year 2021 Continuation Budget, May 14th Finance Committee meeting. I don't know if they can bring that up, or does the committee members have that in front of them?
Yeah.
It was attached again to an email which you can bring up in a PDF. And staff, I'm looking for my summary document, the first page. He'll get that to you. But I'll start discussing it, what this is and what it means.
And that's not it.
No, that's not the one, right? He'll work in getting that up. That shows us at least they can put a document up, but he'll get the right one. All right, but I'll start instead of waiting. So what we do with this document, again, to give you a starting point, there has been no budget put together. Nothing has been distributed anywhere as far as the budget is concerned. The committee was the first ones to get the documents we sent out a week ago. So they were always the first ones to review it. And we start with the prior year adopted budget, which is at the $149,692,067. And then the staff side, every year, there's 2 things in the revenues. We estimate the general revenues, where they are going. And at the bottom of the page, I'll talk about the 3 major revenues for the general fund. And then within all of the departments that you'll see as we go along, there are estimated revenues. We work with the departments to see where those specific revenues are going. The one that and I'll go to the bottom of the page right now, I should say the middle, where it says significant changes. The one revenue that the board has direct control over is the millage rate. The others, I won't say the board does not have control. They have indirect control by setting fees and passing ordinances or resolutions that set other rates that others pay for various things. But at the middle of the page, what's included here in this beginning continuation budget, if you will, is just put together so you can have a point to start from. Is the first one is the property taxes, which we see through the millage rate, which comes from the digest issued by the tax assessor's office. The digest being the assessment of all taxable property in the county. And that's, no, the board knows that, but for those that may be listening, we started with an estimate of
This
a 4%.
conference will now be recorded.
We start with an estimate of a 4% increase in the millage, the tax digest this year, using the same millage rate as we usually do each year. That is to include growth, which was a little slower last year, and any increases in valuation. We start with a 4% on the property taxes, personal and real property. The reason why I see 3.69% here is that also on the tax digest was The autos that were being taxed under the old method, where they had a property tax attached to them based on the millage rate, those have been coming off the tax digest year by year. And we've also again reflected a reduction in the auto portion of the tax digest. And that's why this estimate is a 3.69%. At that rate, that adds $2,187,000 to the anticipated revenues at that level. And that, of course, will change as we go along, as we get updates in the tax digest from the tax assessor's office. The second major revenue, and here's where we get into discussing the impact of a recession from COVID, is the local option sales tax, or the sales tax portion that the county gets, the 1 cent. In this case, we also get 1 cent for the special local option sales tax, or SPLOST, and that goes in the capital fund. What we did here is we just presented 3 scenarios, and we only have 1 data point so far to base this on. So this is just purely scenarios. Just chose the mid one for discussion basis above in this continuation budget. But if our sales tax, after we anticipate it will drop, if it recovers, the economy gets going, and by the beginning of next year, it gets back to a level spot, this level being equal with this last year's budget. So there we'd add nothing to this 2021 budget, then it'd be 0 if it gets back to where it was. And right now I'm just calling that the high scenario, because there's a lot happening in this economy right now that can be very detrimental to the structure of it. The median one that we included in the totals above was a 5% reduction from last year's budget. That's a hit, or a reduction of $1,768,500. And then a low scenario, and again, it's no way, any of these, not a recommendation in any way, shape, or form, just if it were to drop 10%, it would take a hit of $3.5 million from the current year budget. Just for reference purposes, it went down about 25% in the Great Recession more than 10 years ago over a 2-year period, but that included autos, which were included in sales tax at that time. And with that, I'll segue down to number 3. I'll stop for any questions so far, though, on the millage, property taxes, sales tax.
Dave,
Yes.
just a question. I know that the governor's doing the 14% cuts, and do we have any idea of what that's going to mean to us? I mean, is unfunded mandates or things that we need and might be desperate to pull out of our own budget to cover? Do we have any idea on any of those?
Oh, yeah. No, do we have an idea yet? No. Do we have an idea that it can impact us? Yes. But they can impact us in so many different ways. For example, one way the cut he did last year, or early this year, whichever that was, they started to cut back on the money they were giving us for public defender attorneys on our indigent defense office. So whereas they normally send us, I think it was over $100,000 a year, that was being reduced. So it's so many different ways. Now, there's very few revenues where the state collects the revenue and passes it on to us that they could reduce. So our revenues pretty much all set up to come in their own channels. But they could, like as you say, unfunded mandates, where they could push costs down to us. And those are things maybe we can be on the lookout as we go through the various department budgets. But that's a great point, Commissioner. They will definitely seek opportunities to push costs down to local governments.
And I know we've got a lot of people in the courts that are on the phone and are on the video with us, and a lot of what they do in their budget is covered through the state. And all of a sudden, if you get a 14% cut, I mean, I don't think the demand in the court's going to go down. I don't think that all the things that they're faced with, they're still going to be faced. We've still got a population. If anything, during these stressful times, there might be more demand in court. Yes. And if that budget is cut 14%, I don't think they can afford to lose employees. So, I mean, we've got to account for that, or put money aside for the worst case scenario, I believe.
Right. That's a good point.
Well, and the one good thing is the state's going to be putting their budget to bed within the next 2 or a month and a half. And as I understand it, they're to identify, isn't the legislature to identify what the proposed budget would be by the end of this month?
Yeah, I
So
think they
within
have
the
to.
next 2 to 3 weeks, we may have a good sense. That 14% cut was announced months ago. So to some extent, some of that probably has been identified agency by agency. But you raise a good point, and that's another reason why we really shouldn't be I don't think we should be locking in too many decisions until we get a much better perspective. For revenues, that'll take months. For the state budget, we're talking about 6 weeks.
I've been doing this budget process a long time, and I don't agree with waiting until the end and start making changes. You get so locked in when as the process goes on, and to unravel it and to start trying to start over, I would rather let every department know and look at all the different resources we have. I talked to the sheriff yesterday about his budget, and did he have wiggle room to do some reductions? I felt like he was the best one to go to since he has $50 million of the budget, and he's got some room with new employees. I think he's got 14 that he said that he, could not hire, and that would be $1 million. He had some capital also that he said he could do and get us maybe close to $2 million, 1.5 or 2. That's just a conversation, but I think that having those conversations and looking at, he said he could put off, getting new cars and be able to defer till maybe the next year instead of going to 100,000, maybe going to 125,000 if we need be. I would rather set aside some money, like a rainy day fund, or if we could cut 5% and be able to set that aside and then let people come back mid-year to request things after we see. I'd just rather take a conservative approach and be progressive up front. I don't know how Molly and Dennis feel, but I'd just rather be careful.
That's a very clear strategy, is to come in on the lower end very conservatively, and then unless for sure things have gotten better, then you come back up off of that, like you say, from a reserve fund or however it's put in the budget. So no, that's a definite strategy.
Yeah, I agree with Cindy. I think that's from here on, we don't really fully understand exactly what the budget's going to do and what the revenues are. And if we have a resurgence of this thing back in the fall that shuts it down more, it's just too many unknowns. I think we just play it cautiously, and then so we don't have to do anything drastic later.
Molly's got her hand up.
Yeah, I agree with both of the commissioners, Commissioner Mills and with Commissioner Brown. Also on this, the unemployment rate is astronomical, and that is definitely going to have an effect on us as far as our economy goes. So our future in revenue really is probably the most nebulous at this point than it has been for many, many years.
Very true.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Dave, you want to go on?
Sure. Just on the other major revenue that we see the direct impact from economic hit is where the auto sales taxes went to, if you will, number 3 in that page, the title ad valorem tax, which by any other name is a sales tax on autos. It's actually, I think, about the same rate, 7%. And then here, this is one where we came into this in much better shape in the current budget. What served us well is being very conservative. And part of the reason, well, 2 things. First of all, in the prior years, the formula was such where we were not receiving as much until the state changed the formula effective last year in July 1, where the amount we were getting in the school boards, as opposed to the state share went down, was jumped up much higher. And not knowing how that formula is going to be applied, we very conservatively budgeted this year for our TAFT. Number 2 is we were being sensitive to the fact that as soon as car sales drop, this drops immediately. And so we were not trying to budget all that at that time. The distributions we were seeing the second half of last year, so we can't even compare, for example, March of this year to March of last year, the formula changed. We were getting about $1.5 million a month from this resource and this source, or about $18 million a year. To show you how conservatively we were budgeted just over 13 million. You'll see here in the prior year, I think it was about 13,350. So when we show these different scenarios of this dropping 20, 25%, it actually came out to 24.4 when rounded off, and 30%, you'll see where compared to the current budget, there's no impact on the first two because we were so low. If you drop that by 25%, I think you come down to about 13.5, 14 million, and it's still above the current budget and the 24.4%, the scenario B, by 250,000. However, if this drops to 30%, which is very possible, we would see a reduction of 750,000. So that's where we are in the Taft. And of course, well, that's again, Commissioner, to your point about what the state could do, they could certainly turn around and change that formula again and also impact us by reducing what we get from the formula and for the schools. So those are the most, or I should say the largest and sensitive to economic revenues we have. Back at the top of the page, let's bring us back up to that again. You'll see where this fits in. So taking those major revenues at the levels I mentioned at the bottom, which is continuation, basically the same thing we're doing now, except backing off those two economically sensitive revenues. By the way, last thought on the property taxes, we don't show a reduction in those because they're already set based on last year's tax digest. What we collect this year will be for next year's budget. So it's the following year where you would see any effect of the drop in property values. Now, we also have to watch how collections go this fall, because if people are assessed but not paying, that would also have an impact on our collections. So we still will watch that. But we budget based on the digest and whatever millage rate the board sets. So at the top of the page, after the 2020 adopted budget, you see total revenue increases, decreases. The net change, which is detailed in the following pages, but I won't walk through all of those now, is a net increase of just under 1.7 million for a 1.13% increase from revenues. We did back off some other revenues that are impacted, not as large. For example, alcohol excise tax. If there's less alcohol and tax and served in restaurants and so on, that's a smaller revenue, but we backed off of that about 10% to start with, and we're watching that as well. So then when you compare that to what we're calling the continuation budget, which is,
Dave,
so I'll
Dave,
stop
if I
there.
could
Go ahead.
something. Pardon me. I'm sorry, Dave. Pardon me for
No,
interrupting you. But
I should stop.
of course, it really fits in with what you're talking about right now. And that is in your breakdown, you have got that the business and occupation tax went from 0 to 1,422,000 for 2020. Yet at that time, of course, we were not foreseeing all the closing of businesses. So
Right.
that business and occupation tax, I would imagine, is something that we are about to get hit on dramatically in our 2020 budget as well as our 2021 budget.
Yes, that's another we're watching. And by the way, that was moved from another place in the budget up to there. It's still about the same 1.4 million. We didn't really look to increase that. That's just a function of moving it from one place to another in the budget.
Yeah,
But yes,
Commissioner,
I've been asking. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you look at the detailed revenues that we received on page 8, what happens, the state from time to time reclassifies revenues and expenditures. That was reclassified. It showed up as on that same page, several lines down, as general business licenses, and last year's actuals were 1,505,000. This year's budget was, I know, about 85,000 less. Next year's budget is actually almost flat with what we took in last year. And Dave, I think we've received most of the money for this year, haven't we? We allow people to avoid being delinquent, but
right, the renewals
were due by March 31st.
Right, the renewals. Interesting, and that's
even on that, you're showing an overall 25% increase, even on that item that you designated. So that's something that I don't take that for granted.
I think what happened, Commissioner, is that what was under general business licenses was split into two components, one of which is projected to be up 14,000. I suspect, Dave, that's based on last year's actuals for that.
Yeah, I think it's a reallocation. Right.
Yeah, I'm sure the 2019 was based on last year's actuals, and I understand that. I am just saying that as we project even for the rest of this year, that is an area that we are dramatically hit and we have no control.
Right. Yeah,
So
we'll monitor that.
On that one for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's one we can directly monitor. Particularly I can, because I check with Amy as far as the activity is concerned. Our renewals came in fine for, again, if that's this year. Next year we could take a hit. And she's watching the application. Interestingly enough, but I expect this to drop off. She's still getting a lot of applications in for new business licenses. So,
Well, that's good to hear.
yeah.
I know that overall with the unemployment and overall with the closing of businesses, that this is certainly in a state of flux. That's all I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah.
your
No,
numbers
you're
may
right.
be right on target, and then they may be way off, and we have no way of controlling it. All we can do
Right.
is react to it.
But you're
No,
right,
you're right.
we need to monitor a lot of these revenues to see whether patterns persist. You know, and the challenge for us is even the statewide data is not a good estimate for what happens here because the state of Georgia tends to do much worse off. It tends on average to be worse off than Forsyth County, and we saw that with the last recession. So we have to monitor locally to get a sense of what's happening with our revenues as opposed to the statewide average.
Right.
I understand that, but from the statewide average with us, the spillover on that, let's face it, is even though the businesses that folks work for unemployment, for instance, if people don't have jobs, they're not going to be frequenting the businesses here. Therefore, we're going to have more businesses close as a result of all of this. So it has a domino effect. And all
Sure.
that I'm saying is it's something we can't take for granted. We can project, we have to, but we certainly can't take that one for granted. We need to keep our eye on that one on a regular basis.
Will do.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. That's another vulnerable revenue source to what's going on.
Exactly.
And again,
Dave?
that's where, yes.
Going back to the unfunded mandates, I wish there would be a way that y'all could sit down with John Kennard and look at if the LMIG fund, and that's where I'm seeing we're going to be hit the hardest with gas tax coming in 80% under. I mean, 80%. That is, I mean, I don't know that we can catch back up on that. I mean, you only have so many hours in a day that people can drive. And that time that they didn't is gone. So, I mean, I think that we need to look at and sit down, y'all or somebody with John, and look at the roads that, you know, what is the bare minimum if we get 50% of the LMIG that we normally do or less than that, what roads are most needed to be repaved that can't wait a year to be done? You know,
Right.
to prioritize that list beyond what we normally do to be able to see, you know, what has to get done and figure a budget with that too. I think that's going to be it. That will be one of the biggest hits we're going to face, I believe.
That's a good
That's a
point.
good point, and that's phase two, and we'll talk about those revenues. And Commissioner, the one thing there is that we blend SPLOST money for the resurfacing program. So you'll have the option of either accelerating using some of your SPLOST that at this point we were, I think, anticipating that 16 million of your SPLOST transportation dollars would be spent on resurfacing, and you could either push back projects as you were describing, or you could use more of the SPLOST money next year and back off of SPLOST the following year. But yeah, we certainly need to look at that, and that'll be part of the second phase of the budget process when we get to the other funding sources.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still worried about roads coming in over budget that are just now going out to budget that will need some of that SPLOST money to cover it too.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, right now, Dave has us holding $20 million of SPLOST just to cover the $100 million transportation bond projects because they cost more than we're anticipating the transportation bond.
Yep. And I think the 369 bid comes in at the end of this week. So we'll get a look at that pretty soon. That's a good link to the expenditure side, Commissioner, on LMIG, because that's a very good program that John Engineering's put together. It's like, what, 50 or 60 miles a year of local streets they pave. And there's a connection. So less gas tax, less money, less travel. Yeah, you're right. If they back off of that program to 40 or 30 miles a year, however many paving, that would make sense. And you're right. We'll look to that department for options there when we get to that one. And that's very good.
And the resurfacing is contracted out. So that's one where you can turn the tap on or off fairly easily by just reducing how much you contract out.
Okay. The next line item there is on the continuation current service level budget. And you'll see, and I'll comment at the bottom of the page, and a couple of major things included there. When we put together what the various departments had needed to continue their budget, that was an increase of 1.47% or 151 million. Let me get the right page here, $891,112. So comparing that to those revenues, at that point, we would have a shortfall of just over $500,000. Now, at the bottom of the page, here's what's included in that expenditure continuation budget, just so the committee is aware of this. Let me see where we are. Expenditures. Okay, two things there. Well, first of all, we've included a 4% increase for compensation, just in line with what's been done the last 3 years. And that amounts to $2.3 million. That's included in that continuation budget total I just gave you above. Each 1%, if the committee recommends something different, is equal to just over $580,000. Second, in the healthcare cost, which is a major cost for across the board for benefits, we've at this point have just under a 3% increase in there, $600 per employee from $20,400 to $21,000. That represents a $561,000 increase in that continuation budget. Each percent of that, if we can back off of that sum, well, each 1% is equal to $200 per employee, or $187,000 impact on the general fund. And then lastly,
Hey,
and I'll
Dave,
stop. Go ahead.
on the raise, I'm looking at the amount budgeted for raises, and I'm just trying to think of all different options when we try to come up with money.
Sure.
Could you do like for half a year and then come back and look at maybe raising it more, at the midway point? Like it,
Right.
say
If you
if
did
you
a
would
half
do
year,
a
like you
2%.
did actually with the salaries.
We lost you, Dave.
I didn't hear you. I lost you.
Yeah. All right. Let me. Can you hear me at all?
We can hear you now.
Okay, I'm trying to get my VPN went down, so let me try to reconnect, but I'll turn off my video. Right, we could, if I, get to hear me, we could do a year being mindful of the impact on the following impact.
So you
I
can,
didn't get all that.
Okay, I think can you hear me now? Am I reconnected?
Yes.
so
Okay,
Commissioner, I think that's an option. We do it, based on the beginning of a pay period. But what Dave was starting to say is that would be a one-time savings. You'd save some money next year, but you would have the annual impact of it by the following year. So the 21 impact would be reduced. The 22 impact would be the same. And that's sort of what we did with the pay study last year. We intentionally suggested that you phase in the pay study, so it took effect July 1, so that the 2019 budget only had to absorb half of the cost. By this year, we have the annualized cost, so we know it's sustainable. And the good news, that means that the growth in personnel costs next year will be slower than it was last year or this year because we've entirely absorbed that. But yeah, that's a great option. One thing I would just point out from my perspective, the 4% isn't a recommendation, but for us to have at this point factored in a number other than 4% would have presumed a decision that really needs to be made by the board after a recommendation by this committee. So it started with the
What would help us in making that decision, Eric? If we were to be able to see how much, over the last 3 or 4 years that our salaries have increased by. I mean, that pay study, I know it wasn't, everybody didn't get it, the big bump, but a lot did.
Yes.
If we as a board could be able to look, or as a finance committee, at it, it might help us be able to make a better decision if we could see, well, in the last 3 years, this many people have gotten this much of a raise, and, it might just make that decision easier to make.
Sure. Now, if we had some employees on the call, which we don't, they would point out that we were playing catch up. We looked at 17 surrounding jurisdictions and we were trying to play catch up, but we can certainly pull that information, and you're right. I mean, we spent a lot of money trying to get pay up. The one thing I would suggest is if you look at inflation, inflation today is virtually non-existent, unless you're buying eggs, which went up 16% recently. Food prices are up, energy prices are down, so inflation is pretty much non-existent. What you try to do with your merit increases is address two factors. You try to keep up with the cost of living, which is inflation, and then we also want employees, based on getting more experience, to move through their pay range. We don't have steps like the federal government does, or some organizations and some unionized groups. But the idea is that someone that's been here 4 years ought to have a gap between what they earn and the person that just got hired last week that doesn't have the experience. So with inflation virtually non-existent, you're really only looking at what does it take to ensure that employees are moving forward within their pay range, so that an experienced employee is making more than someone that just walked in the door. And of course, the good reason for that is you don't want some other jurisdiction that has someone retire or expands to hire away one of our experienced employees and put us in a position of having to start over again with a brand new employee. So we can look at that, but I just want to explain the 4% wasn't presuming where we should be. It was to say anything moving away from that is simply suggesting that there's a specific reason for us to move away from the 4% that we've given the last few years. But you see how significant that is, and that's only within the general fund. There's savings that would flow through each of the areas where we have personnel funded, like the water and sewer fund. Sorry, Dave, you want to keep going? And,
Yeah,
and
can
let me
you
just
hear
say, any committee member that wants to talk, as long as there's something showing up on the screen, I can't see all of your faces simultaneously, so feel free to just jump in. I can't see you put your hand up unless I constantly move the pictures back and forth.
Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try. My VPN connection keeps coming in and out. Okay. Taking those things, the very bottom of the page, you see a couple of the major transfers that go to the capital outlay fund. For example, for our capital replacement program, we have $4 million being transferred again out of current revenues. That, of course, we're looking at that program to see how much the total will be needed for next year. That's something we could also back off of. Number two is I think this would be the third year of the $1.25 million transfer over to the neighborhood identification program for the $250,000 per district for each commissioner. And finally, we had in the current year budget repeated $3 million for facilities going over to the capital fund for replacement and so on. Okay, all right, still with me?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Then back up at the top of the page, we just show what the total, and these are not included, but we show the total new items requested from the various departments and offices. That includes all the new positions, which was about 33, totaling $3.8 million. That's not included up above. We're not making a recommendation on those. If, for example, all those were to be funded, the total amount that would be needed above the current revenue estimates would be $4.3 million. And I'll stop right there on the overview and the economy. All right.
Dave, could y'all do a study and see how much money it might give us if we did move on the cars from 100,000 to 125,
Sure.
like the sheriff mentioned?
Yep.
I'm just trying to figure out ways that we could save, that we could come up with some money and not affect employees.
Right. Right. That's something we could certainly work with that replacement program.
And along that line, one thing is, Commissioner, the sheriff has SPLOST money and had planned to buy half of the vehicles each year with SPLOST. So by shifting more of the vehicles to SPLOST, at least for a year, you could shift additional cost out of the general fund.
Yeah, that's a good idea too.
Okay, and that's the overview presentation. Whenever you want to move on to the agenda for the offices and departments.
Sure.
Sounds good. Okay.
Let me comment on one thing here on this agenda. We found out when we moved from the afternoon to the morning, the group that was in the afternoon, one group was the court administration with Superior and State and Juvenile Court. If we get that far, they were not available this morning, so we will reschedule them for one of the following meetings.
Dave, this is Becky. Robin and Wayne said they could reschedule and meet at 11 today.
Okay. All right. Well, then they're back on the agenda again. They're further down anyway, so that might work out just right.
Okay.
All right.
You want to go ahead and move on?
If we're ready, we can go on to Part C. The first one listed is the district attorney.
Good morning, Penny.
Hello.
Dave, are they in order in the book, or are you going to give us the page number?
Well, the elected officials drop on the additional agenda we sent out this morning. I'll give you the page number. It's page from the supplemental agenda, page 151. It's in section 5, judicial. And Attorney Penn is right toward the beginning of that.
Okay, so I see that page 151, and you have it up on the screen. Dave, you want to do a brief introduction, then let Ms. Penn talk about that?
Yeah, I'll do just a brief summary as soon as I'm almost there. Get into that page. 148. The pages that are numbered, of course, are the summary pages, and there we go. All right. The key things we focus on are if there are any new requests. There are none from her office. The summary of the budget is $1,049,036. That's up 5.92% from the $990,000 the current year. And most of that is in the salaries and benefits. Her operating expenses, which are up $300 from $43,300 to $43,600 for 0.69%. That's their operating expenses for their office. The rest of it's salaries and benefits and some internal service charges.
You want to take, maybe since this is the first organization, want to talk about the interfund departmental charges, since that will show up kind of throughout the budget discussion, and that's not something that's really controlled by each agency?
Right. What that is, in the case of the general fund, other funds is a little bit different. There's more to it. In the general fund, this is primarily I'll just call it their insurance premium charges for workers' comp and liability insurance. So if they have any vehicles, that includes their insurance on the vehicles, workers' comp coverage. Those transfers go to our insurance funds that charity has for workers' comp and general liability. So that's what those internal charges are in each department. Really an operating expense, it's their insurance cost, if you will.
Okay. Well, Penny, if there's anything you'd like to talk about, and you heard the earlier discussion about the risk of what the state might do, anything that you're familiar with in terms of exposure there would be helpful.
As you can see, just looking at the change in the budget from 2020 to 2021, from the DA's perspective, it really hasn't changed. Of course, when all of that was submitted and when we first began this process, we were at the very beginning of this pandemic, and now we are where we are. I think that how this will affect us as we go forward is that since, I guess, mid-March and now through at least June 12th, court is very limited. Only those cases are being disposed of that it is essential to do. It's been the defendants who are incarcerated. So we've got all of these cases that are stacking up for resolution later on. Our last grand jury was in March. We have not had grand jury in April or May. We won't be able to have it at the regularly scheduled time in June. I think that it remains to be seen whether we can have the grand jury come in the latter part of June. But, you know, once these cases, then we start moving on them, they get in the pipeline. So I can foresee as the months go by and the farther these cases move, that's into this year, and then throughout next year, is that we will be in court more. And then the potential is there that we would need more than what we had originally anticipated because we were not planning for this. We were looking historically, you know, so you're talking about bringing in, you know, more witnesses from out of state, you know, spending more in the way of postage to send out for court notices. So I can anticipate that being an issue in the future. With regard to the state, the Prosecuting Attorneys Council has its own budget, and then the district attorneys have a budget, and both of those are part of the judiciary. So we are not required to come up with the 14% in cuts, but of course, both of those organizations are trying to make cuts consistent with that. And in terms of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, they have a little bit more to offer than the DAs do. And I can tell you that one of their cuts would be the licenses for LexisNexis, how we do our legal research. So when one of y'all had mentioned earlier about the cost from the state getting passed on to the county, that is certainly one that I would, you know, look to the county if at all possible to try and help us out with. You know, they would be reducing the number of licenses that they would be providing. I think it was 3 for an office. In terms of the DAs, there just isn't much except salaries. You know, they are paying for people. I have 9 state employees, 6 of whom are prosecutors. And in order to come up with that 14%, it would require furlough days. And at this point, it is going to be a lot of them. And we're just in the beginning of this budget process. The hope is that we will not have to cut all 14%. But even half of that is really going to be devastating, I can tell you, in terms of them personally, financially, and then just practically, because going back to what I said earlier, I anticipate that we are going to be busy in the upcoming months, and that these are going to be people who are going to be needed in court. In 2008, I was able to pay for furlough days out of forfeiture money, and can do that now. I just don't know that I'm going to have that much money, that I'm going to be able to do that. But that's certainly an option.
Penny, can you come up with a number, what that number would look like, so it would help Dave in looking at the budget?
For furloughs?
Yeah, like for, if the county were to step in and recoup that cost for you, what would that number look like?
Well, and I would tell you, Commissioner Mills, also, please, I haven't talked to my staff about this yet. We have a meeting scheduled. But it would equate to about 20% pay cuts.
But I'm saying, what would that number look like if the county were to supplement it?
Well, I don't know for the prosecutors and for the admins for each of my people. I don't have that amount yet. I can tell you for the DAs, because there are some of us who would furlough. If all the DAs would agree to furlough, then we could cut these furlough days by 6. For me, that would be a reduction of $18,000. And of course, I'm making more than the others, but I don't, at this point, I couldn't give you that. This is just started. So I can't tell you what the drive out price would be for everybody else.
And you're just one department. I mean, we would be looking at all the departments and what that might mean. I just think we've got to get to a ballpark number in trying to figure out this budget. Because I agree that courts, because of not having court, you're going to be busier than ever. I'm sure the solicitor's office and everybody else is too, trying to get caught up. And to try to do that, get caught up with less staff is going to make it very problematic.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a challenge. And I know that the prosecutors are unified with the public defenders council on this, hoping to persuade the legislature that with the situation that we've had with courts being suspended, that, they just can't afford to take that hit. And certainly, the judiciary is in a similar spot. I know previously they had some of their state employees furloughed. Last time, I think it may have been the administrative assistants. I don't know that their judicial assistants were furloughed. They have money budgeted to use senior judges. They gave that up, but they don't have a whole lot either. And they're going to be saying that, we need to have court. And they need prosecutors and defense attorneys in there. And the criminal cases take priority over civil because you're talking about a person's liberty. There are constitutional rights involved that there just aren't with the civil cases.
An interesting thing is we're talking about the state budget cuts, which take effect in about 6 weeks.
Right.
But we're looking at a budget that starts 6 months later. So we probably need to break this into 2 components. There's what do we think is going to happen between January and the following December 31st, which is the fiscal year 21 that we're looking at. But you're looking at a potential impact in halfway through our current fiscal year, which is not a 21 impact. A lot of this catch up in terms of catching up with activities that haven't been taking place is not a 21 budget issue for us. It's a current year budget issue. It's what you may be asking the board now for 6 weeks from now.
Right. And, we're still, I think with the pandemic, the next milestone date is going to be June 12th, but we don't know what's going to happen at that point.
Sure.
Whether we're going to be able to resume, having jury trials. That's really going to be the biggest challenge. And, when we can start putting people together in a room, and the same with grand juries. So that's also, that's, uncertain at this point in the very near future, and then we keep hearing this talk about, the fall and winter even being so much worse. So at some point it will begin, and I think for us it will be extended, over a long period of time as we go through, as cases go through the typical process. We're just not sure really when that's going to begin.
I think this is just a clear indicator of the uncertainty and yet the significant need for us to look at the budget in a much more, in a different way than we ever have, since I've been on the board, every way than we have before.
I think it certainly helps that the state will have its budget by July 1. So at least that part of it will be known and we can proceed.
Know what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Right, right. And, you know, I don't know again about the feasibility of using forfeiture money. It's there and I will do it, but it's just a matter of how much. You know, there is so much. We don't know whether the DAs will have to cut 14% of that, you know, at the end of the day. And, you know, it could be where perhaps not just the prosecutors, but the state pay employees can be paid, you know, some of the furlough days be paid with forfeiture money, you know, so maybe the number of days can be reduced. I don't know. And if they do get furloughed, then practically that's just really hard trying to figure that out too. Just to, you know, in terms of scheduling.
Well, Penny, I would say from the Great Recession, I think the worst thing that any of us did was furloughs because you're saving money by not having people work, but by not having people work, what happens is the work is still there. It just gets backed up, and it's about the crudest way of saving money, I think. But
Right.
a
Well,
lot of people used it.
yes. And that was all that, you know, we had. That's just the nature of what we do, is that for the prosecutors, you know, we're paying for the people. The service is in the person. I paid last time, it would have been for 6 employees for about 15 months. And no one remembers whether that was for the entire time or started out after they were being furloughed, because that was new to use that money to pay for salaries. And I think it was about 2 days a month that people were furloughed.
Okay. Well, we'll look at with you at the forfeiture revenue and see what opportunities you might have there.
Okay.
Any questions from the committee? Okay, if not, we'll move on. Thank you very much, and just obviously keep us apprised of what more you may learn, and we understand the sensitivity of what you shared that you haven't shared with your staff.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Dave, who's next?
Next is the tax commissioner, page 221. And I think the original time he was scheduled was 10 o'clock. So hopefully his office is on now. Do we have someone from the tax commissioner's office on? Turn on your mic if you are.
All right, that means his budget gets cut 5%.
I think he'll be on real quick if you keep that up.
In
All right,
10 minutes, it goes to 10%.
They're on. Hey,
Well,
this is,
well,
they're on.
Are they on?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amanda, unmute your mic.
Let me give the summary. On page 221, the summary, top of the page, you'll see there was one new item requested. That was a vehicle for 50,000. I think there's some
Come on,
that.
we're online. Can you
Very
hear
good.
me?
Yep.
Okay, let me turn my volume up just a little bit.
Okay.
We can hear you.
So there's one new
Sorry.
vehicle requested, and Matthew Ledbetter can address that because I know there's some latitude with that. As far as this budget's concerned, overall it's down slightly.
What page are we on, Dave?
221.
Hang on, I can't hear you.
221. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's getting better. Turn that thing on up.
All right.
I'm old.
Okay, hold on. Let me turn
It's
this more.
It's up on the screen.
Matthew, your budget was just cut 5% because you're late.
Can't believe y'all can't get that straightened out over there.
I hear him. All right. And the summary again, there is his overall total operating budget is down 1.63%, primarily again because of some changes he has made in the salary and the staffing there, which has reduced his total salary and benefit budget. And the operating side is up less than 1%, about $7,000 on 763,000. And of course, we'd have to bring up, if we didn't, Matthew would, his office turns over a lot of fees that help to pay for both his and the tax assessor's operation. Up there, top there, you see him budgeted at over $7 million, and that's based on a percentage of all the taxes he collects for all of the entities in the county. And that's about it.
Cindy, I heard you a while ago. I know you're on. Who else is on with the Board of Commissioners as far as who's on the finance deal this year?
Molly Cooper and Dennis Brown.
Are they on?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right.
No, Matt.
The only thing, I'm gonna be short and sweet today, but we don't know what the economy is gonna do. I don't think any of us can predict it or have a real good handle on what this economy is gonna do. And naturally, when the economy is bad, is when we're busier because we have more delinquents and more return checks and more problems collecting money. And I just want to bring that up. We're going to try to stick with the budget that we have, what David just told y'all. But y'all going to have to bear with us too. If this thing goes, really goes crazy, it could take more money. And I want to make that clear to everybody. The worse the economy is, the busier we are. Does anybody have any questions on that?
And back to what Dave was saying, if we look at what you collect, what you're anticipating collecting next year versus the cost of operations, you're generating $2.8 million in revenue more than you're costing to perform your services. And some of that is, did you want to talk about the kiosks that you're using and how effective they've been through the pandemic?
Yeah, the kiosks we have 3 in Forsyth County, one at exit 17, one at Bethelview and Castleberry, and one on down at Highway 9. And they're all 3 in Kroger's that we have a contract with them. They were doing between 90 and 100 at each location per day. So you were averaging, say, 300 a day. Right now, we're averaging over 1,500 since the virus has got us locked down. So that's a big number. And I think people that go to them are liking them, and I think they'll go back to them. I had to go with my uncle up and get some tags at the one at 17, and there was 4 people in line behind us by the time we got his tags, and it didn't take a minute and a half. And that's a good, cheap way to collect money.
That's one of the things we're trying to push, is to find effective ways to use technology in place of people. And another example when we get to Parks and Rec is what we're doing out at the boat ramps, collecting revenue there too.
Right.
How much are those kiosk machines, Matthew?
They run us about $6,000 a month,
And that's for all of them?
paid for by the user.
Oh, so it really doesn't cost us
It's like
anything.
a threshold of use. It costs you $3 to use it. If that makes sense.
I was just thinking that maybe you ought to put a couple of more of them.
Do what now? Make sure.
I was just thinking that you might want to add a couple more.
Well, but if I don't get my 1,200 a month, I have to pay the big fee. Once I pass the threshold of 1,200 transactions a month, they're free. So,
Oh, okay.
but I'm not over a whole lot. But yeah, I like your thinking there. And I think over time and as we grow, we will be able to add more. I think a great location right off the top of my head, I think that's going to be a Publix over at Leon's. But that would be a
Yeah.
good location for one. And then I need to find one down, maybe not all the way at Midway, but down there on that end somewhere. But we talking about that. Have we heard anything on Sharon Springs? Where are we at on that? I hadn't talked to Dan. I know everybody's been busy and a lot's going on, and I'd like to throw my 2 cents in on that if I could. I know that it's expensive, the bank across from the Halcyon, but that is the best location, rooftops, doing our studies from planning, zoning, and so forth. That catches Midway and Sharon Springs, the 400 corridor. And I think $3 million is a lot. I do. I think that's a lot of money, but boy, you are right where you need to be. And I want y'all to keep that in mind as we go forward with moving out of Sharon Springs and doing a new location. And it is a lot of money, but it's where you're
Matthew,
going to.
what about, can you operate out of a house if it was fixed up? Dennis, I'm thinking about that house across the road from the park.
Yeah, that came to mind, if we can keep it from flooding again.
Sharon Springs?
Yeah, it's right across the street.
Let's tear it down and build one.
Yeah, there is that too. We'd have, it's over an acre of land, right, Eric? When that,
And it comes with a swimming pool.
yeah, it's got its own swimming pool.
I think that's a great location. It's where it was before. I'm telling you, Matthew, that $3 million, I know it's a great location, but I mean, what was the lease you were talking about? 10,000 a month or something?
Yeah, and at that point, I think you ought to buy it instead of lease it. Here's the beauty of it. You got 4 drive-throughs. Well, 2 girls can work 4 drive-throughs, if that makes any sense. You can operate so much cheaper on the labor side than you can a full walk-in. You don't want to walk in anymore. It takes too much time and it costs you too much to operate it. I think you want to go in the direction of the drive-throughs. Like one person can work that drive-through in front of the office and they're helping more customers than 3 or 4 clerks inside because it's so much faster. And we know
I
that.
get all that, but I think we should watch the economy. With no new businesses opening, they might come off that price a lot.
They might. What's happened is they're still in a lease. They're still collecting their lease payments from BB&T. They got it for $17,000 a month.
No wonder they closed the location.
Right.
The other thing we talked about is whether the tax commissioner could collect water bills also. And we originally talked about whether we have water and sewer in the same facility as the tax commissioner, but when you start to get 2 different organizations in close proximity, you have 2 different organizational cultures, and it would be easier to have one organization kind of do the cash collection for both entities. So that's something that we need to look, but we definitely need to get you out of Sharon Springs Park because we have to tear down the building that you're currently using.
I think that bank makes a lot more sense if you could put water and sewer in it too, and they could help absorb some of the cost.
Yeah, and
Here's the thing,
it was your concern that led to that consideration that might be a good site to do both.
I think but knowing the success of kiosk machines, I mean, if you can't get water and sewer in there with you, Matthew, I don't know how that number could make sense.
Well, we can have different opinions on that, I guess. The thing with the water and sewer, I don't mind collecting their money for them. But I want the people in that office probably need to be under the tax commissioner's office. We don't mind being at center, more or less. I don't know why they don't go with a kiosk too.
But could you not take the drive-throughs and divide it and have one drive-through, or have some lanes that are for water and sewer and some, and just have one office there that is just water and sewer?
In all honesty, we're helping 1,000 customers a day. I don't know how you're going to service them. I don't know how you're going to get it all through. I mean, we have a lot of customers now. I mean, and the way it's growing, if it continues, we were going to want something. We'll do whatever everybody wants to do. I don't want water and sewer. Okay, say I need to work on this weekend, or they want to do something and my folks aren't there. I don't want to be responsible for the money that somebody else is taking in and my money being in the same building, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, they just
So I would
couldn't
want
touch her.
if they operate out of our office, we would want to do the collecting for them. We'll deposit the money into their account. Won't be any problem to do all that. But they need to work for us. They don't need to work for some for them and some for us coming out of the same building unless they have their, you're talking about separate entrances, separate safes. There's a lot of different things that'll overlap that we could be a lot cheaper and more efficient if we ran it the other way. Just had a payment center.
And that's kind of where I was, Matthew, the concern that you try to get two organizations in a small space doing similar activities. It's hard to have two different cultures within the same office when one is working for a separate elected official. But
My name's on the building. I want to make sure that our customer service is up to where we like for it to be, helping those customers with water and sewer. We'd have to get educated, get our folks where they can answer some questions and different things. We'll be glad to collect the payments and we'll be glad to deposit into whatever account Tim Perkins wants it put into. But I think they need to work for us, because the only way to make it real efficient and make it where we can save some money is for the same people to do more of the jobs, basically. They wouldn't have to hire anymore, and I wouldn't have to hire anymore because I've already got enough down there to run the facility,
Well, we have our customer service people working remote now, so we're probably in a better position to understand how water and sewer people could handle the technical questions that a customer might have if what you're doing is doing cash collection. And
exactly.
Then turning over, to a virtual assistant, the questions that really take someone in water sewer to answer.
I really love the idea of a payment center, and you send the questions and the customer service problems, direct them to a different location.
Send them to a call center. And the county sets up a call center, and the call center has different folks within it that can answer different questions about different things in the government, not only water and sewer, but you need one that can do different things as far as maybe planning, zone, and engineering, different things, just a call center. We have a call center at the main office up here. We have 6 people full-time answering the phone. And call centers work real well. They can do other things too. They can do mail. They can do there's a lot of different things they do while they're talking on the phone. You can do that without customers in front of you. That if you had customers sitting there, you can't do it.
But for $3 million, I think we definitely need to look at that site across the road too, to evaluate if we could build something for much less than that, and it be just as effective and efficient if it were built.
Yeah, I don't know if an acre of land, that's the only part that scares me, but I'd be glad to look at that, me and Dan. I don't know if Dan's on this call or not, but Dan, are you out there? I guess not.
Yeah, I don't think, looking at the people, he is not.
That's not a problem.
You need to look at that. We'd have to maybe look at how do we get better access in and out, because right now it's a steep driveway down from Sharon Springs Road, so.
We're glad to look at it and investigate it some. I don't have a problem with that at all. But we want a smaller building and more drive-throughs is what we really want. We want to try to deter the walk-in.
That ought to be cheaper to build too.
You would think. It's pretty, I don't know. I have no idea what it would cost. I figure a couple of $100 a square foot is about what building costs. The drive-throughs are kind of expensive because they have the things, the tubes and the cover and the security of it and so forth. But I don't have any idea what it would cost. I don't. I have no idea.
All right, other questions?
Does Matthew want to give some background on the vehicle request?
We're good on vehicles.
Okay, you want us to withdraw that $50,000 vehicle request, Matthew?
I do. But
Okay.
I want you to put 2 of those positions back in that you took out. Because I'm scared if something happens on this coronavirus and we take more money to do these collections, that we'll be short. So
Okay, so you may need to restore some of the positions you took out. Okay.
put 2 in.
You don't know for sure you need them.
No, nobody else does, I don't think. I know that in 2008, that's whenever we really got rocked pretty hard when the economy went down. You know, those are the people that move things around so much, your boats, your businesses. There's going to be a lot of, we're working on businesses now, and some of them are really hurting. I don't know if they're going to come back or not, but we can't let those assets get out of the county before we get them seized. If we do, we lose.
Right.
5 or 6 businesses, you've lost more than it costs for a person trying to find them.
Matthew, what if we left the positions? So you had the authorization for positions, but we held off in terms of putting money in for those positions. I mean, you'd have the record that the positions were there should you need to fill them, but depending on when you get to the point where you feel that you actually need to fill them, if it's the beginning of the year, you need an annual amount. If it's partway through next year, it may be later this year, but you know, to put money in if you don't know at this point whether you really need it, if you just had kind of the assurance that the positions were available, because that's a separate process to establish new positions, but you had the assurance that if you need the money to be able to handle the level of activity, that you kind of had the head nod that you would be able to get those additional funds if necessary.
I like what you're thinking. The problem, in my opinion, is just like right now, we're putting in glass at the office between the clerks and the customer. We didn't have that in budget because we didn't know we had no clue we were going to need it.
Sure.
Well, it's going to cost me $36,000 out of my budget. I don't have any wiggle room at all. I'm going to have to have some money. If things don't go as planned and there's always things that come up, what am I going to do? I'm going to be so tight that I can't, you know,
Sure.
I made that call 2 weeks in, by the way. I had to make that call back in March. We're still 6 weeks out, 4 to 6 weeks on getting it installed. I do like to have a little leadway on whenever I think we're going to have something coming up that I don't have to run over there and ask for money.
Yeah, Eric, I think that's what we did with his positions. We reduced the funding down to a few dollars as a placekeeper to just keep the positions there. So it will be just a funding issue, not requesting new positions. So
yeah.
I don't know what y'all's suggestion is there on like those emergency funds that you need. See,
I mean, I think you have to ask for that. I mean, if you don't have the budget to cover it and we've got to provide it, I've never known you to be shy a moment of your life. Don't be shy, just ask for it.
Yeah, I think the key is if everybody has to set some money aside for something that might happen, then that takes a lot of money. If we give each organization the assurance that a reasonable request won't be unreasonably denied, then that's why we have reserves. And you just let the board know you have a need.
Eric, I don't know how you've handled it But instead of every person going out and getting their own plexiglass or whatever put in, maybe we should have bid that out and got a much better price too.
We did bid it out, Cindy. That was through procurement.
We did.
See,
But did you do it separately or did you do it as all the locations?
Well, what we,
10 years to do all locations.
so we're doing plexiglass shields at most locations because those are where our concern is people breathing. You know, it's in the case of the tax commissioner, only at that location that we anticipate they'll remain at. Are we putting in the heavier duty glass because that's more like a bank location. Most of the other locations, you know, the planning department, if we get past COVID, doesn't need to have those plexiglass shields in place forever. But for a cash handling place like the tax commissioner, it's more like a bank situation. So it made sense to have a more permanent type of installation. But we talked about the fact that at Sharon Springs, since we're going to tear that location down, that would get plexiglass that will simply hang from the ceiling or have sitting on the counter for now.
But you did put all the locations together in one bid. That was
We
my
have like,
question.
well, we have like 40 panels coming in that are self-supported on top of a counter. And I think 10 panels that suspend. And then, yeah, it went through, Matthew called me, he'd already talked to Donna, it went through procurement. All of the plexiglass panels are in a single order. The glass is separate because it's a different material, but that's the only location where we're doing glass because we see it as a permanent installation. The plexiglass will be ones that we get through the end of the pandemic probably will be removed and stored someplace should we need them again.
I do think, Eric, we need to assure these department heads and constitutional officers that face emergency crisis that wasn't planned for in their budget. I mean, that's not that would, I don't know one person that would think that was out of line to ask for an increase to cover it.
Agree.
I'm glad you said that, and I feel like that's what we have to do sometimes. You know, we had to buy. You know, we bought so much stuff. You know, we were buying the hand sanitizers and the cleaning supplies, and with customers coming in and different things, then we had to buy some barricades for the parking lot to get people in and out without being, you know, keeping them 6 feet apart. All those costs, and as long as we have a relationship that we can come and talk to you, and then Eric, you've been good about that. But I've been in this a long time. Sometimes it's not so easy to call them up and say, hey, I got this problem. And we got to make a decision pretty fast to get things in motion, because by the time you go through procurement, you got to have somebody come out and they got to do their measurements. Well, that's a week and a half. Then you got 2 weeks that the bid has to set out there. Then they got another week before they have to have the bid in. Well, then you're 6 weeks out. We've been working, like I said, the first calls, I think me and Eric talked about this, was in second or third week of March. And we're still out, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just the way the system is designed on these emergency. You know, we could open up. I would open up Monday if we had the glass in already, but we just don't. And I don't think that it's a smart idea to do that until we're ready to go, for the employees and for the customers. But my first priority is naturally taking care of my employees, and to ask them to be there and have 750 customers a day come in with cash and checks and dealing with each one. I just think it's too much exposure to do that. But if we've got that relationship, I'm fine with that. If y'all make sure that we know that down, that if we run into these kind of situations, that you'll help me to work through them, take the positions, defund them, but keep them on the books where if I need something and get in a type that I can use them. The truck also, we're fine on trucks right now. I don't see that by then we're not going to know anything. We're just going to really hit us is after November when we see the property tax come in, that we're going to have a problem or not. We'll really have a handle on it by January and February. We'll know, hey, we're way behind or we're ahead, and we hope that we're ahead, but we never know.
I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, you make you have to have a budget, you have to have some idea, but when a pandemic comes along, you gotta accommodate. You have to look at it a little differently.
But the way things work is whenever I make a request to purchasing, to put like the glass, we'll go use the glass for an example, and I say, okay, let's go. Well, then they're gonna send over to Becky for a requisition in what account? And I gotta have the money somewhere. Becky can't issue it. She's gonna be calling, hey, you don't have the money to do it. You know, it's got, you know, it's all got to come
Yeah, but
together.
that's where communication has to take place and common sense.
And it does.
Reach out to a commissioner if you can't get it done. I would think that finance would say, oh, this is something, or the county manager, this is something that's got to be done, and I'll bring it to the board. Eric's got discretionary up to $50,000.
Yeah.
I mean, there's ways of accomplishing things.
Yeah. Well, we did it. We're less than 6 months into the fiscal year. So, yeah. Matthew had my reassurance that we'll cover it if we need to. The important thing was to get it on order, which we did.
Yeah, and it's coming.
The challenge right now is we're competing against the rest of the world.
That's exactly right. The glass companies can't even get the glass. I mean, they're so busy. But as long as we're all on the same page with that, I'm fine with the budget. Think real hard about the Hacienda location. I think it's a great deal for us.
We'll get you out to the Sharon Springs location to take a look at that.
Okay.
Hey, real quick question, Matthew.
Okay.
Is that building big enough if we wanted to make it like a one-stop shopping where it would just, like to Cindy's point, we could justify that by adding maybe even some kind of permitting there or some other functions of county? I mean, is it big enough for that? And have one person say you could be in charge of it, taking in all the revenues, and then just keeping up with it, but it could take in money from any county function. Is that feasible?
I'm fine with that. It's got plenty of office. It's got more office space than I need. What I wanted was the teller, the counter, and the drive-throughs.
Yeah.
An office or two, but there's 4 or 5 down there. It's one of those banks where you walk in and you're in the lobby, and they have the offices surrounding the lobby. So yeah, there would be some office space. There could, get the right build out. If you wanted somebody to do that, you could add some things to it.
You could even put a sheriff's office or a small place there, because I know before that built up at Halcyon, the bank there, it was easy to 400, so the robbers would hop on 400.
Yep.
So I think I would like to see us move towards a one-stop shopping concept where, and to your point, Matthew, I love what you said about accountability. You could be in charge of taking the money in. They could just key it in, to whichever department it goes to. But then you could have these other offices with county functions there that didn't necessarily even handle money, but they could service citizens across a wide range of needs.
I think that's the direction we need to go in, because you can get so much more out of 5 employees that way than you can 5 employees selling car tags and collecting tax. I mean, you can just get so much more for your bang for your buck there.
And you should
The
have
only problem that we're facing right now is that we've got a county admin building, land needing purchase, sheriff wanting a bigger, a headquarters. I mean, it's like we're doing the juvenile justice center, and and our permits were down 50% last year. There's a lot of less money. We've just faced a pandemic. We don't know what that's going to do to the economy. And my question would be, where are we getting the $3 million, and what's got to be sacrificed to do it?
Well, that's on the Board of Commissioners.
short term, you might be better off leasing it to validate whether that ends up being as good a location as we think it is, and split that cost among the functions that would share that space.
You could do a lease purchase.
I know.
That's an option.
I know it sounds expensive, guys. I do. I realize it does. But you can be down there in minutes from coming. Once you get on 400, I mean, you're there. It's just got a lot of advantages. I like it because of where it is. Hicks did most of the research on the situation, and that's kind of where I am right now. We'll look at any avenues, though. We're not just stuck on one place. I ain't saying you got to spend all that money. We'll look at different things, but it's a good thing to look at. It really is. If we make payment centers, we'll be ahead of a lot of counties on a lot of these folks. What we need to be asking is how many folks can we eliminate job positions by doing this? I bet you could pay for the building by the jobs that you'll eliminate across the board. No, they're not.
Well,
doing
you
that, but
need to make,
can.
you're trying to sell it, you need to come up with that.
Well, it's hard for me to call Tim Perkins and ask him how many people and all that kind of stuff, Cindy. Y'all gonna have to do that. I can't.
Yeah, I mean, just in your department, would you lose any? I think that is a great point. I think that's a great point.
I'll have fewer people that can take care of more customers, but I won't really lose any because I'm moving from Sharon Springs over to there, but they can do more functions there and they'll be able to take care of more collections. And collections is the key to making any of this stuff work. If we don't collect, we can't, we got to have the money. I'm looking at I think the tax digest is going to have to go up some this year. Building, we're still building a good bit.
Matthew, there's another building open there at the collections across the old Regions building right there by the Starbucks. I don't know if you looked into that, but that's a similar excellent location. I didn't know if that was a similar.
I knew it was there. We haven't looked at it yet. We looked at 4 or 5 different locations, but that is one we ought to look at too. Bank buildings work so good for my situation because of the security that's already there. Your safe's already in. If you start building new, it costs a lot to build a tax office because you got to build the safes. You got to build all the stuff that you can buy it cheaper than you can build it most of the time.
Yeah.
Well, I like the idea that if we could put some other department into some of those offices, then you're spreading that cost among more functions.
Yep.
Sure.
Citizens really love it when they can go in and handle all their county business in one place.
Well, it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to change the landscape the way this virus has turned us to doing things different ways. I'm anxious to get open back up and see how much walk-in. We're able to do all the functions that we normally do the way we're doing them now without having the public at all. But I'm anxious to see, some of that business will never come back. They're going to do it online. They're going to do it mail. They're going to do it kiosk. They're going to do internet. They're going to do it over the phone. We have all these different options. I'm anxious to see how much it's the walk-in that kills us. If we didn't have all that walk-in and we could get some of these people to use some of this technology that we have, we're going to be a long way down the road,
Yep.
But only time's going to tell us that. Once we get open back up, we'll know more on that.
Okay, any more
questions?
No.
All right, thank you.
Eric, I'll be in touch. Cindy.
We'll look at some of those, and then let's look at the model that the commissioners are talking about of what else we might be able to put in to spread the cost around.
Right. Anywhere you're collecting money, whether it be park and rec or sewer or whatever, we'll do whatever we can.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Matthew.
Roof on your back porch, Matthew.
Feel free to call me if you need me. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, ready for the next one? I still see Bill Finch's smiling face sitting there. And page 174 is the summary page.
I can tell you why I'm smiling, because I was at first scared to come in here and ask for money for the Adobe Suite be able to do our work. But once Matthew came in and asked for a $3 million bank, I'm no longer worried about asking for $4,000.
Oh, my.
True.
Get in line.
But at this point, he didn't get his $3 million.
All right, everyone get to page 174. I think it's up on the screen. Let's see if it's up on the screen yet. Yes, it is. Not state court there. Wait. We want, oh yeah, solicitor, I'm sorry, state court, that's correct. All right, summary. Total budget for this office, jumping to the bottom line at $2,089,000 is up 2.53%. And again, that's primarily from salaries and benefits, with the increases there had been given last year. Operating expenses are actually down slightly from the $50,900 to $47,900. And again, the standard 5% increase in the internal insurance. With that though, we did adjust. There's a revenue that's up 75,000. I think that's we'll have to keep looking at that again because that's fees that come in through another office that he manages over in a pretrial, I believe. And with that, Bill or committee, take it from. There's no new items requested other than what you were just mentioning.
Well, I would like to point out that, you know, I don't want to belabor the point about the impact of the COVID. I think that's been addressed a lot already, but alcohol and drug use doesn't take a break during a pandemic. As a matter of fact, I think it increases, and when people are kept at home with alcohol and drug abuse, then you have more domestic violence cases. So we've seen an increase in that, and although the judicial emergency order has cut off our ability to bring those people in to court right now, those cases are continuing to pile up. And once this judicial emergency order is lifted, we're going to have a mountain of cases that we're going to have to attack. And one of the things that I wanted to ask for is our ability to do things remotely. It is a new way of doing justice, and we have started to do a little bit of that, and that requires the cooperation between our judges, our defense lawyers, and quite frankly, the defendants that are in our courts. And with our case management system, we're having to create documents in Adobe, which is fine because we can use the free version for that, and we can sign, which is okay. But the problem comes in when we have to sign and send. And so when we have to send those off for judges' signatures, defense lawyers' signatures, and defendants' signatures, we suddenly realize that we can't do this with the way that the court is asking us to do. And so I would ask that the committee and the commissioners give us $4,000 for the Adobe suite. We've gone through procurement, and I believe the amount is $2,500 for a year's subscription, but that's only for about 13 of our employees. We have another 6 or 7 that we need to be able to do that. And so I'm roughly guessing that it would bring it up to about $4,000 each year. So I would ask that the committee take a look at that and see if they would.
Bill, is this something that the other departments, I mean, the DA's office and others can use, or they already have it, or? Well,
I think that the way we are trying to do this now with the judicial order is that the DA's office is not going to be able to use it as much as we do, because they're going to have in-person court proceedings in order to put somebody in the state prison system. That's just not going to be something that can happen remotely. However, we can address issues like domestic violence cases, being able to put them on probation, be able to sentence them to the family violence intervention program, that sort of thing. We can do that remotely because we are not putting these people into our jail, and we're not putting them into the prison system. and we're actually getting them supervised, tested, and going through the family violence intervention program. So I think because if we don't do this type of work, then the cases just simply sit out there and wait. And the earlier that you can do the intervention, I think the better.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I do agree that the mental health aspect of this pandemic is going to be way bigger than people are anticipating, maybe.
Absolutely.
So are you thinking that you're going to be able to have some of your employees continue to work from home maybe in the future?
I hope. This is new for all of us, and it is quite the adjustment period, but between IS&T helping us get ready for this and loaning us laptops so that we could do this, it is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. So I do thank them, but when we do come back to work, I'm going to have to give those 6 laptops back to IS&T. They've simply loaned them to us.
Yeah, that's another budget consideration and you brought it up, Eric, before at a meeting, that if we are able to have more employees through this experience, and we know that they can work from home, we've got to better prepare them to do so from home with the right equipment.
Yeah, we're gonna, the connectivity. I mean, just like Dave was having a challenge, but yeah, we've learned a lot in a short period of time, and I think we recognize the value of laptops versus desktops. So we'll be better prepared to have people in position where they can do this, and the opportunity to save money on not having to have as much office space. I suspect most of the IS&T people won't come back to that county admin building potentially ever. To the extent that we can set them up to work remotely, we save a lot on space, and we're just talking about the cost of buildings. But Bill, I don't think you have to worry about giving up the laptops too quickly. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and you work in the area of the law, so just lock the doors and they can't take them back. But
well, I thank y'all for that, and I thank y'all for the recognition that we need to do this, but we also need to be equipped to do it, and so I certainly appreciate that. Thank y'all.
Is there anything when we have to deal with traffic court again? Anything that we can do differently to reduce? I mean, that flood of people that comes in and descends on your office.
We are having a meeting on Friday to address future arraignments, and that is with an eye towards reducing the number of people that come in here. We are going to address the number of cases that right now require court attendance and the reading of rights in front of these defendants. But what we want to do is be able to do a lot of that online so that they can pay and go, so that we're not bringing them in here, because every single time you bring somebody into this courthouse, 5, 6, 7, 8 employees have to have contact with them.
Yeah.
And between the reduction in contacts that we're specifically looking for right now, and then man hours associated with touching all of each one of those people who come in the building, I think it's just something that we're going to have to look at.
Yeah.
I think that this might be, and we talked about it before, but a great opportunity of looking at our systems and how we do things and figuring out how we can do it better. Because you look at the stress on our parking deck and needing to expand that and spend millions of dollars that could be, if we just use technology, we might not need to do that, or it might give us more years not to do it. I mean, I just think looking at all those factors of how you can do arraignments online instead of coming in, or the only people coming in that are the people that don't have online resources, and paying those traffic tickets and stuff ahead of time, I think that's fabulous. I mean, just fabulous. I wish we could figure out how to do jury duty panels and do that online, and then only call in the ones that you need to have. You're right, because the more people you bring in, the higher your chances are that somebody's got the symptoms, somebody's got it. So that might be the reason that perpetuated it, but from a cost savings to the county, it's huge too.
I agree, Cindy, and I appreciate you bringing that up because although we hate the reason why we're going to do this, it might have been the kick in the pants that we needed to be able to do our jobs more efficiently.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for sitting through so much to get to your discussion.
Well, Matthews was the most fascinating. I'll have to call him and tell him.
All right.
I got to see the roof that he just put on his back deck. We didn't see him till the very end, but I drove by there the other day and saw he had a roof up back, and now we got to see it on TV.
Okay,
Well,
I
thank
see
you very
Judge
much.
Bramlett. Magistrate Court is next, page 163. Summary, page 163.
Are we on?
Welcome, Judge.
Thank you.
Dave, you want to do a brief introduction?
Yep, sorry, I didn't get on page 163 here. Okay. Of course, we had the mid-year adjustment we had to do this year for those cases that we will update this budget on. That occurred after this was put together, I believe. Let's see. Looking at new items on the top of the page. Already, no, okay, we're updating the 2 administrative specialists based on that action in April. Other than that, that makes the bottom line up 12.98%, and that's primarily because of the salary and benefits costs that were added in that area. His operating expenses are actually down 5%, and no other new items requested. With that, Judge, anything you want to add?
Our biggest concern is postage right now. We think we've had to postpone cases and postpone them again, and that's going to keep going. We're going to start staggering cases when we gear back up. That's going to mean more postponements. So our mail's going to go up. But other than that, we may need a couple of laptops. We're not very good at working from home. We're very paper intensive. However, we do first appearances on Saturdays. And it would help with some of the staff demands if the clerical work on that could be done by the clerks from home. We have 2 clerks that do that. Other than that, no, we're in pretty good shape.
Walter, hey, this is Cindy. Sorry, I should say Judge Bramlett. I just know you as Walter. I've looked into that, us hiring those 2 new employees.
Right.
And for that, what Emery's office is doing or Andy's doing with all those companies. I mean, do you think that is something that we ought to talk to our state legislators about, trying to change that?
Frankly, I don't think you can do a thing in the world about it. This is my opinion. Did you mention you were going to talk to Ken? Did you ever talk to Ken about it?
We have talked about it, but I don't know if he got back. He was going to research it. I asked Deborah Nesbitt with ACCG about it. And I mean, at first she was like, no, the business has to be located in the area. That's a mistake. They should not be doing it. And then I got back to her and said, no, it's like because they have an agent here, then the burden of it all falls on our county, even though we would love to have the corporate headquarters of some of those big companies. and be reaping taxes from it, but instead we're getting just the expense and no benefit.
Yeah, here's the thing, and we talked about this some over the email exchange. Every corporation has to have, I mean, in every state where they do business, they have to have a registered office and a registered agent. Apparently, that's a pretty cheap thing to be able to set up and do from wherever they want to do it. They're going to look to do it in the metro area. Most of the attorneys, the collection attorneys, the whole scheme, you know, it's convenient for them to do it in the Atlanta area. So that's where we are. I think that's how we got picked, and I don't think there's a thing in the world we can do about it.
I wish they would just
Spaced out enough
negotiate a
in
fee.
law office.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Cindy.
I was just saying, I just wish that the state would associate a fee that would cover those employees, you know, that would better cover the cost.
So
I'm not doubting the amount of work
yeah,
and that it's taking.
yeah. Well, you know, that'd be something for the General Assembly to look at. We sure welcome it, but don't have any control over it.
Is that an easier ask of the General Assembly than trying to change the jurisdiction that has responsibility?
Yes, I would say.
I don't know. It's hard.
Request.
I mean, my experience with this is about as much as yours, but I don't think getting them moved is feasible. So yes, I would think seeking funding to deal with that when it happens and where it happens would be easier to make happen in the General Assembly, but I don't think it would be easy. Easier and easier, two different things.
I just wonder if, I mean, if we're the place, did they used to be in Gwinnett, you said, or used to be in?
They were in Gwinnett. I don't know the details of that. I just know that these registered offices got moved from Gwinnett to here. What we were told, kind of anecdotally, was that the court system over there is so bogged down they couldn't plow through it, essentially.
I just wondered if they dealt with it any different, or if they did something to discourage it, to make it they really didn't want it there and they discouraged it to get rid of it.
I think they've got a slower court system because they've got 1 million people.
The only other thing I had a question, and it's really not about budget, but about communication. And it's just a question. We get a lot of complaints, you know, from the seat of a board of commissioner, which we are just like a magnet for complaints.
Right.
But we have a lot of complaints that are due to code enforcement issues.
Sure.
And then code enforcement then has to go through their process of warnings and then blah, blah, blah. And then it gets finally to magistrate court. And I get complaints that, you know, once they get to magistrate court, nothing's happening with them, or it gets thrown out, or it's not addressed, you know, to put teeth to it to make people do better. If there is a way, and I'm not saying that's true, I'm just saying that I get complaints. Is there any way through our code enforcement process that we've got things missing in our ordinance that need to be in it by the time it gets to you? Are those being addressed? And can we do something on our end to make things better so it makes it more effective and we're not just shuffling paper?
How long have you been getting the complaints, Commissioner?
Oh, I don't know. They're sporadic.
Yeah.
I mean, yesterday I had 4 code enforcement complaints.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I just know that sometimes when I'm copied on emails and Steve has to go back to the neighbor that's been enduring whatever they're enduring, that by the time it gets back to them and there's not something really being done in the way of punishment, then the neighbor is just furious, and of course furious at the Board of Commissioners when we have absolutely nothing to do with it.
Mhm. Yeah. You know, this issue's not new. I probably, the first time I talked to a commissioner about this was about 12 years ago. I mean, you know, these kind of complaints come up from time to time. And I think at that time, the complaint was that our fines were too high. We were charging people too much. So no, I don't know exactly how to deal with that. What we have done when we go to revise our fine schedule, I have tried to bring the commissioners on board with it, the county on board with it, every department, you know, that has something to do with it on board with establishing our fines. But other than that, I don't know else. Other than getting the fines the way that the county and the courts and everyone feels is fair and appropriate. It's difficult for me to know how to address those complaints without hearing them, Commissioner.
But I know each one's individual. I mainly was about the ordinance. If you see, or if I think Molly works with y'all the most from Ken's office, but if we're missing something in the ordinance that's causing the process to not work effectively, I would just hope that you or somebody in your office or Molly, somebody would come back to us and say, I'm sure we're going to be bombarded with short-term rental issues that might be coming to you later once that goes into effect. And there has to be some type of just the communication that you're not getting the results you want because your ordinance doesn't have the teeth to it needs to have. Just that kind of communication would be very beneficial to us.
Okay, we'll try to make that happen.
Thank you.
If I could hit a maybe related issue, what about the situation where we go through code enforcement, we bring an item to your court, and then the defendant asks for a jury trial?
Not in code enforcement.
Okay.
We don't. I can't do that in code enforcement.
I thought that had happened.
Some of them have been bound over yet. They asked for that. The attorneys
And
did.
then our challenge is
State court and the
the
solicitor's
case isn't prosecuted.
Okay, I had to talk to Connie there a minute, Eric.
Yeah.
I apologize. It's been a long time since I presided in ordinance court, so you'll have to forgive me, but she said we do have some that demand jury trials and they get kicked up to state court. I presided over those cases for a long time. I don't remember that ever happening, but I suppose it happens from time to time.
Well, I think the challenge then is if they're not prosecuted, then in effect, we've walked away from the opportunity to really enforce something through code enforcement.
Yeah.
I guess my question is just if there's anything there that we can do in the ordinance, or are we just stuck with the fact that they always have that right, and at that point, unless we're prepared to have those prosecuted, we're suddenly seeing a case thrown out.
I can take a look at that, Eric. I don't know. I mean, do you think that's happening?
Well, I think one came up related to a case related to the development over near Lake Lanier.
Okay. All right, we can certainly look into it. To tell you off the top of my head how many times we have ordinance cases appealed or demand a jury trial, I don't know, but I would say very rarely.
Okay. Any other questions for the judge, or? Looks like we don't. Well, thank you very much. Apologize to you for the wait, but thank you for helping us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walker.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is accountability courts. I see Jennifer Johnston is on. A little bit of explanation for this, what I'll call a two-part or two-faceted budget. First of all, in the general fund, and that would be page 141 for the summary, is only a portion of the personnel cost for the accountability courts, specifically 5 positions for the salaries and benefits, no operating expense. What we'll also flip over to later, and this year we made sure we put them both in one track so Jennifer's not tied in 2 budget tracks. The date fund is also part of the accountability courts, actually all of their operating cost and the rest of their salaries and benefits. That's on page 245 through 254. There should be a summary of that in the front of those pages of the fund. And with that, Jennifer, there's nothing new requested, I believe, here I see in the summary for next year. With that, Jennifer, if you want to give any introductions of your accountability courts. If your mic is on.
There I am.
There you are.
I don't have any new requests. I don't know exactly what else would happen or will happen as far as our grant funding. So we're, again, looking at the state for that. So like everybody else has said, when that budget comes out, that would help us know more about what grant funding we would have available. But we have tried to utilize that grant funding only for things that we would supplement our programs with. So we are not going to be cutting normal operation if we don't get all of that grant funding. But I will say there is one salary tied to that, and that would be the care court coordinator. So my goal would be to put any funding that we do get for mental health court into that salary so that we can keep that position going without a request from the county. And so that just may mean that we have some more requests from care for the date fund as to how much they would need to spend on other things that we would have to pay for. But that's the only thing I can foresee right this minute being an issue for us as we sit now.
Okay, let me add one more thing from the summary on page 245. You can see the balance of that fund there. We did not have to dig into that balance too much last year, so we're still running about a $400,000 balance in the date fund, which could help in the short term over some short funding from the state. But that, of course, is limited, how long that would hold out.
Right.
And there are fines or fees in there of just over $500,000 as part of the budget in the date fund.
And those may decrease just based on what everybody's allowed and available to pay over the next several months. But again, I don't feel like we're going to utilize more or expend more. We've tried to go to, because we've cut fees for May and June. No, April and May, excuse me, April and May. We have not required the participants to pay fees for those 2 months. However, we are utilizing grant funds because we're not bringing those fees in. We're using grant funds that we already have that will end June 30th to pay for those group costs. So we're kind of breaking even there where those fees aren't coming in, but we aren't expending any of our regular budget for those group meetings that are happening right now. So hopefully we will be back on track to start collecting what fees we can in June. The good part is a lot of our participants are essential workers, and a lot of them are continuing to work. And actually some of them are picking up more work during this time because other people aren't coming to work. So we're staying caught up with them on that and what they are able to pay, but we did not charge them for April or May.
So you're not seeing a big jump in unemployment with the participants?
Not a big jump, no. Again, most of them are working essential jobs. So we've got a lot of landscapers, we've got a lot of contract or construction people, we've got a lot of food service. Some of them have been cut back, some of them are still working the window. So not a whole lot. We have had several that have lost jobs, but for the most part, we have seen some that are furloughed, but not to the extent that they're impacted horribly yet. If it continues for another couple of months, we may be in a different place.
Other questions?
Jennifer, are you seeing the impact of the pandemic on any of your participants going by the wayside? Are y'all still able to do checks, urine checks, and all the things you usually do?
Yes, ma'am. I'm here every morning to do drug screening, so we have not stopped that. We're bringing them in the building 2 or 3 at a time, keeping them separated, but we have continued to screen them. We are doing groups via virtual meetings, so they're doing those that way. But as far as relapse, we have had some that it's been hard for them, but those people are mostly the ones that we took in right before the pandemic increased to the point that it's at now. And so we haven't been able to have regular group with them, see them in a face-to-face way and engage them. They've been doing this all online, and that's just a hard way to get into your recovery. So we have seen a little uptick in those, but overall our participants have really hung in there. They're supporting each other. We have a care pantry. We've had donations where we're giving out food and household cleaner and anything that we can get our hands on that we're providing to them. And we've had several of them donate. They're helping each other find jobs if they have lost jobs. So they're actually rallying together and trying to support each other in that way.
That's great.
It is. It has been really refreshing to see.
That's good information.
Jennifer, since you're tucked into your own building, if you need any personal protective equipment, just make sure you let Chris Grimes know. We're trying to keep everybody supplied, but recognizing you're in your own space, just make sure that you let us know if you need materials.
Yes, sir. I've completed the spreadsheet and sent it back to charity, and also I've emailed Chris directly about some thermometers for when we do start doing some individual sessions here in the building, but we're not sure when that's going to happen yet.
Yeah, that's unfortunately one of the toughest things for us to find. I think we're hoping to get some in next week, but we did get a batch that showed that your temperature was 86 degrees, regardless of who it was used on. So
those are good.
Those didn't pan out too well, but I think Donna's got some on order, and we're hoping to get some in the next week or so. So,
well, until we bring staff back in the building. I'm sorry, Cindy.
The sheriff was our speaker at Rotary yesterday, and he said that he had a lot of small bottles of hand sanitizer that if anybody needed them, he offered. So he's got some too.
We've gotten 50 from him already. We reached out and asked about it when I saw him on Facebook saying he had them. I thought, hey, can I have some, please? So we're sharing resources with him. We've provided a few things to them, and they're reciprocating. So we're resource sharing the best we can.
We may not want you to get the hand sanitizer that's manufactured by a distillery.
We actually have a 5-gallon drum of it already. So yes, we do.
That may not be sending the right message.
Well, none of it is really. They use it, and I walk out there and say, did somebody just use hand sanitizer, or do I need to get the breathalyzer out? So we get it out. We're putting it in unmarked bottles for them, so they're not seeing the label from the distillery. We did do
that. Right.
Well, it's higher proof and better effectiveness, though.
It definitely is higher proof. I can tell you that.
All right. If there are no more questions, thank you also for waiting for us.
Yes, sir.
Jennifer, let us know if you hear of any things coming down from the state that's going to be impactful to your budget.
Yes, ma'am. Once we get staff back in the building, we'll start looking at doing individuals in live person and start bringing people back in the building. But I'll let you know as soon as we hear anything from them about what the next budget cycle looks like. We've already submitted the grant, as you all know. We've already submitted our application, but I doubt we'll get the level of funding that we have in the past. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Clerk of Court, page 145 for the summary. And I see the clerk is on, although it says James Parks. We know that's the clerk there, we see. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're both here, and James is just logged in, and I'm on the camera.
Dave, you do your overview?
Yep, let me make sure I'm on page 145 here, where I can see the whole thing. Just a second. Oops. Let me try to do it off the screen. Okay. Not a lot of change there at all. Operating expenses are actually the same as current year. And just increases in salaries and benefits for a total increase of 4.13%. And I don't believe we had anything new requested at the top of that summary page.
That is correct.
Greg, why are the revenues down 2.7?
We are not getting as much, or we weren't getting as many people requesting copies of things because they can get that online themselves. So they weren't coming in our office and getting as many copies.
Okay. Greg, are most of your employees, I mean, it's a lot of them are public driven, or do you see that you'll be able to keep some of your employees working remotely from home after this is over?
We've currently got several working at home, but it's only because of age and medical and childcare issues. I think they need to be in the office working. While they're doing a great job and everybody's pitched in real well with this, I think in the long term, we need them here. To get the work done here, we've got plenty of space for them. So I think they'll be back in here.
Do you see that there's any way we could ever do jury selection and be able to eliminate, or maybe not just juries? Is there ways that we could do more via internet to keep so many large volumes of people coming in at one time? We just talked about that with Bill Finch, and he's coming up with some things, but do you see a way that we could use technology and do it differently in order to lessen the contact for our employees with so many people and the demand on parking?
Well, you'd have defense attorneys not real thrilled about that, I believe. We'll probably have to figure out some way to space out when we call people in, not have as many in at one time here in the short term. I talked with Justice Melton last week, and they're not anyway prepared to go forward with jury trials or even grand jury unless it's absolutely necessary. Just because of the amount of people have to come in and the fact we always have to sit close together. I think that'll probably be the last thing that we start doing again on a regular basis. We'll have to kind of see how things go, but it'll be, the thing about jury duty is we compel people to attend and compel them to be here, and they have to be here. And we have to try to accommodate them as best we can, but it's, really hard to do remotely. I don't know. It's going to be the big thing to be addressed by all the courts.
I just believe that, which there's some that do not have internet, but I would think if you did it by panels and you had them up on a screen, I don't know that defense attorneys would hate that. I think you might could look at them more closely.
Well, that's more for the judges to make the call on that too. We get them in here and get them ready, and then the judges worry about that end of it. So there's going to be a lot of different people and moving parts. You've got the defense attorneys, the prosecutors, the judges, clerk's office, a lot of different people involved in it.
But following that line, do we know of, the entire country is going through this same predicament. Is there any kind of intelligence coming out of any place else in the country where they're looking at doing that? I mean, I agree. It's, you know, earlier we were talking about traffic court, but we're hard pressed to be able to accommodate all the people that show up for jury duty, and then, you know, we have them streaming back to the parking lot over the course of the day.
Right.
You know, if okay, so I'll leave California out because we never want to compare ourselves with California, but any place else, I mean, if they're looking at this issue, you know, obviously there may be changes that require legislative authority, but you know, if there's any way that can be done remotely, and then bring the panels that are selected in, it would have helped in the past, but obviously we're living in a different environment going forward for potentially months or years. So I just wonder whether anyone in another state has come up with an approach that we can consider here.
Not to have anything I've seen or been made aware of, everybody's pretty well shut down their jury trials. And you got to remember, one of the problems in Dougherty County down in Albany was an infected juror infected a lot of people at jury assembly, which, you know, they're probably the worst hit county in the state. So that was, you know, people are, it's something that's got to be seriously discussed once we can get just some of the other operations of the court going back.
Okay. Other questions? Well, I appreciate your hanging on with us this morning. I know you were on at the stroke of 9 o'clock, so thank you for wading through, and please let us know as you hear from the state so that we understand what implications there may be. The challenge for county governments is we're an arm of the state, so but things flow downhill to us, it seems. So
if I hear anything alarming or maybe something we can address real quick here, I'll let you know.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, are we ready? Next is court admin, and I know Robin Brooks is on the line.
And Wayne, thank you.
This is spread among 4 different pages. The actual court admin budget themselves will start on page 148, and then we'll move on to separate pages for the separate Superior, State, and Juvenile Court budgets. With that, Robin, I'll let you just give us an overview of all 4. I don't know if there was very much requested as far as new items was concerned. I don't see any under your budget.
Good morning, everyone. No, there are no significant changes in our budgets. Other than there is a position request in pretrial services, but everything else is somewhat level funding from 2019 or 2020, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you for mentioning pre-trial. I'll have to get that page number 2. Okay.
Robin would be the great person to look into that jury duty. Were you on, Robin, when we just talked about that with Greg?
No, bring me up to speed.
We were just talking about with COVID and people being so afraid of big crowds coming in. Is there a way to possibly do jury duty selection via Zoom, Skype, whatever?
I'm also thinking that we could use those virtual platforms, but we can look at it and apply a little more studied way of doing it. Instead of having 3-4 judges requesting a jury, maybe just do 1. So a lot of coordination and collaboration with the judges. And, you know, we will look at things like, are there some things like in state court, instead of having 12, we can have 6 jurors and not bring in all the extra jurors that we do. So, you know, a lot of times we have a number that we send home. So we would just winnow that down to exactly what we need per judge. And then we're looking at things of, because we compel the person to be here, we feel like we have a higher standard to protect their safety. And so
I agree.
maybe a deliberation room that's closed is not the right place. And so we could utilize perhaps a larger office space, meeting room, or maybe even our extra courtroom, 502, whatever would make jurors more comfortable in being there. And we've upped it, and we would make it very clear in sort of PR releases that we are doing everything in our power to, make sure that the rooms are clean, that masks are available, that we're using every effort to make it as safe as possible. Now, we are interpreting the judicial emergency order in that we will not send out any jury summons until the order has terminated, which is June 12th. Takes 5 weeks, so we're not looking at any jurors until probably August. So we are well aware that we need to give a lot of thought to better managing the jury process.
Do you think, is there something in the law now that would prohibit looking at doing it virtual?
I don't know that anybody's doing it because, when you're going through voir dire, there's a lot, and not only are they answering the questions, but, the facial, how are they answering the questions? Does it seem fair? The jury is a very important, part of the judicial system.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think, however we can make it safer, but still go through that process. It's better for, not only just having a good trial, but making sure that it doesn't go up on appeal.
Yeah, it would almost be better if it came from, if a way was figured out from the state level and sent then to the courts to do it. So that way, if the Attorney General could come up with a format that would work, it probably have a greater success in the courts later.
Right, and it wouldn't need to be applied statewide. So coming from, Justice Melton or, the state, I think that would have to govern not only us, but statewide.
But Robin, is any other state looking at this? I mean, we're all dealing with the same pandemic. Has any other state looked at having juries start through an electronic process?
Not been a lot of discussion just because we keep moving it on and on and on. And most of the energies right now are how do we get trials, how do we get those essential and essential hearings taken care of. We have been inundated in trying to determine the right virtual platforms to hold these hearings. We're going through Microsoft Teams. In Teams, we're limited to how many images we see on the screen. We're starting to use Zoom. We're exploring whether we need to, because we have to comply with the open courtroom edict. And so if you can't come into the courtroom to view the hearing, how do we make it accessible for our citizens? And looking at using Zoom and streaming it to YouTube. So there's just a lot of energy in working with our IT departments and how can we best accomplish this to make it fair. And
will that platform have to be uniform across the state, or do you have the ability?
right now, Georgia is a hard state to knit all the counties together.
Sure.
And every county is doing it their own way. The best that we can do, we had a meeting this morning with IT, is how can we at least make sure that all our courts are using the best virtual platform that provides the most safety, and to make sure, because we don't want, if we're out streaming on YouTube, that they're being filmed or exploited in some way. So, all of a sudden, we have had thrust upon us this need to determine these virtual platforms that are, are none of our wheelhouses.
Yeah. And we're on GoToMeeting today, but we're going to be going to Zoom and we're streaming this on YouTube as we speak. And yeah.
The whole
same
process has
challenge
been
boards feel have
schizophrenic.
public hearings.
Yeah, so you get GoToMeetings, WebEx, Teams, Zoom, and we get calls on, your text. So it's been a bit nuts in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's a different world, that's for sure.
And I think this is going to change the way the courts work profoundly, because what we found is there are some hearings like jail bond hearings or jail calendars that work very efficiently using a virtual platform. The judges like it, the jail likes it because they're not having to bring the defendant over, and the attorneys like it. So we see.
I think that's wonderful.
Mhm.
I mean, I think the least amount, it saves money all the way around. We're looking at having to build more parking decks to accommodate, people that come to traffic court. And I'm like, do we really have to bring 600 people in at a time for traffic court all on the same day?
And that's another area that we have been looking statewide, because traffic court is one that just about every jurisdiction brings in, 100, 200 people. The way that we're looking at it now is breaking it up and staggering it and using technology as we open, channels, and we say this many people can come at a time, one time, and then the next group report, 2 hours later. And then with some other technology, we're still just getting our fingers on, can we do messaging where we say, you need to come to the courtroom but stay in your car and we're going to message you when it's a good time for you to come to the courtroom. But I do see a lot of these efficiencies staying around, which is good. We're now, we've got a year or so with e-filing for civil, and it's worked great. We started e-filing for criminal so that you can see probably the clerk's office, winnowing down the need for staff. I don't know what that means for the court system, but we're walking into the land of doing things profoundly differently. And if we are
Curious, Robin, why do all the traffic court, are every one of those people in traffic court fighting their ticket?
Well, some come and they don't know that they can pay. So the solicitors works with them. A very small number make their way up to the courtrooms. So those that make their way, they want to have a trial, and it could be a trial about running a stop sign, but they do have that ability. But a lot of them are resolved before they ever get to the courtroom.
That seems like it can be done online. I don't know why they all have to come in.
No,
and maybe it's a matter of just better communicating.
Yeah. And that's another thing that we're finding now, that we need to rely on technology, is that knitting together of all the departments and how we can do things better.
Well,
in your position, do you have the ability to make recommendations to the solicitor's office on how that's done? I didn't bring it up. Bill seemed to be talking about trying to look for ways to do it better.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's been a sense, my sense is there's been a sense of having some of these people have to show up and understand the seriousness of the issue. But, the challenge is, you've talked about the parking garage, and I agree with you, because I see the people that are trying to turn around on the 5th floor and come back down, and then they illegally park all over downtown to go to a traffic court. Well, that seems to be a little challenging, that for lack of people knowing where to park, they're parking illegally to show up for a traffic ticket. But, the other challenge is we're putting those people on the road at the time of the day when our roads have the least capacity for them. And let's face it, some of those people are coming from other counties because they may have gotten caught speeding in our community but they're a resident of some other county and they're coming a long distance on 400 or 20 to show up downtown to appear for a very short period of time. So that's the worst thing that we could possibly be doing, is putting a lot of those people on the road. And of course, the challenge is, why are they coming? Because they're not the best drivers, but we want them to drive on our roads and come downtown at the same point in time. So yeah, I'll be glad to talk offline to Bill, but to the extent that we can have a different mindset about how many people have to show up. And as Robin says, if a very small number of them are actually showing up in a courtroom because they want a jury trial and they want to fight the charge, anything that we can do to reduce the volume of people in the garage, but also the volume of people driving on our roads. And in some cases, they may be driving 20 miles or 30 miles to get here because, they got caught speeding on their way to or from the outlet mall in the next county, but they made their way from Fulton through Forsyth to make it there. So,
But we do have a meeting Friday with the different departments specifically about those two hearings that bring in a lot of people, traffic arraignment and bonded arraignment. And so hopefully we'll make some progress there.
yeah, we have challenges when we have weather interrupt and we double up and we have 2 months worth of people descending on the same day. So, well, so let us know if there's technology opportunities that can help. I know that you're working with the sheriff and Chris, but let us know your PPE needs, because just looking at the sheriff's data on how many people enter each of the court buildings on a monthly basis, if we're going to provide access to surgical masks for anyone entering a court building, that's a high volume, and that's driven by traffic court and driven by jury duty as well. So
we're trying to make it in the judicial protocols that litigants that come to the court come masked. So hopefully that will defray some of the need to
Sure.
supply. Then we also thought we could just have them park in the garage and come through county admin.
there, and we'll supply them. It's all coming from the same source. Donna has to source your mask the same as she sources anyone else's. So, yeah. We want to talk about some of the other. We've talked about court admin. Do you want to talk about anything related to the other courts?
Let me, if I may, Eric, I'll go ahead and we'll go to each page so that the committee has a chance to review them. Starting with court admin and the page 148 there, they're at 1,366,000, a 0.94% increase. It's mostly salaries and benefits. The operating expenses are actually down 5.7%. I'll stop after each one. Do you have any questions about the court admin budget?
Robin, do you get any state funding at all that you're concerned you might lose, or what you'll do if you do?
No, we don't.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'll go through these in page order number. Next, page 157 is juvenile court. See if I get to it faster than Stephen puts it up on the board for you. 150, there we go, juvenile court. The big thing here is, well, let me give the bottom line. $2.4 million budget's up 2.06%. Again, a lot of salaries and benefits, but the big expense here has been for the appointed attorneys and the, let me get to the right account lines. Anyway, the accounts that have been going up seem like exponentially every single year. We have finally gotten ahead of that, unless the state does something different to push those costs down. Let me get to those 4 account lines. Show you on the detail pages, it's page 160 of the line items, but the court appointed attorneys, the guardian ad litem, the child placements, all combined were just about $1 million. That budget now has leveled off, and we're budgeting almost the same as the prior year. And hopefully maybe if the usage has leveled off,
Yeah,
we'll
I
go
think
down.
we're going to see a plateau for a while.
Yeah, finally, after about what, 3 or 4 or 5 years since the law changed.
Right.
So there's good news there, and we are moving some of the cost over for the child placement, since we're paying directly on that. So I think we're good there. Hold on just a second. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry, I'm back. All right, any other questions on the juvenile court budget? Nothing new requested there.
Well, the good news is that they're going to get a building that was designed for courts as opposed to
Right.
a motel.
Lodgers.
Okay. Let's see, and page 166 is pretrial. That was where we had the position request. Okay, there we go. Pretrial release officer at a total cost. Again, this is on the new items which have not been added to the continuation budget. That's $79,352. The continuation budget is up 9.64%, in part because operating expenses are up $11,000, but the rest is salaries and benefits. Any further questions in pretrial?
No, but I do have a change for you that you will like, Dave, on under supplies 531,700.
Okay, that was those operating expenses.
We had originally asked for 12,000. I think that we can reduce that to 6.
Okay.
That's for drug screening. We've got a new process. I think that will bring that down.
And that was primarily where the increase was. So.
Susie, you can cut that in half. Robin,
I'm sorry?
did you say you think you can cut that in half?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, page 171 is the state court budget. That's where the large amount of fines and forfeitures or their fines are recorded. Although we backed off of that a little bit from the $1,967,000 down to $1,901,000, which is just in line with what they collected last year. Other than that, the expenditure budget is up 3.89%. That's again salary and benefits. Operating is only up 0.35%. I'm sorry, it's down actually $200. No new items requested through the state court budget. Okay, the last one, Superior Court, page 177. No new items requested. And there we did increase some of their revenues, but their expenditure budget is up 6.67%. Again, operating expenses down -6%, so the increases are all in the salary and benefits areas. And I think we had some increases in those areas, particularly that they had come to the board to request for, I think it was some of the supplements for the staff earlier this year. Actually, it might have been last year.
Robin, how's your visitation going?
Better. We're still having issues, with the Saturday, Sunday. I don't know that we're going to be able to resolve that anytime soon.
So staff's still not offering that?
To my knowledge, no, but as far as, the visitation with, and, now that we have the pandemic, that's changed everything a little bit, but, working with staff, that has gotten much better.
I mean, when we met with them months ago, Bill Fielder said they were gonna start doing that. Maybe the pandemic's partly why they haven't, but
Yeah, well, we're running into a lot of issues with the parties not wanting to do that custody exchange because, one parent doesn't want the child to go into a newer, maybe unsafe. So that's just kind of been in a state of flux in the last couple, 4 or 5 weeks. And the judges are having to interpret this not being in school does it equal vacation where it should go to the other parent? So.
I tell you, when we were on that mental health call the other day, and the lady, I think she was with the school system, maybe their social worker, but she said that child abuse cases were being reported was down 80%. That's scary stuff right there.
Right. And a lot of that is you get your initial reports from the schools, and when they're not in schools, it is able to remain hidden for a long time, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're not going to get parents calling, turning themselves.
No.
And that's all of the areas to look at under court admin and the courts.
Thank you, Robin.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
and,
much.
I appreciate you letting us pop on at 11. We had some other meetings that we just couldn't reschedule for, so thank you.
It worked out
For your
perfectly.
flexibility.
All right, the last one on the agenda today is the coroner's budget. The coroner is not available. Well, we can say, of course, there'll be a new coroner next year, depending on the election. So this was actually next year's budget. As we put it together, it's a continuation budget, page 102. It's actually down 6.9%. That's where it stands right now. So this will be one looking to a new coroner. By the end of the year, we'll see if that incoming coroner will need any adjustments, but that's where we stand on that one. You can take any questions in the coroner right now if you'd like, and other than that, we can announce where we'll go after this first session. So this one,
Any questions?
Why couldn't the coroner be on?
Anytime expenses are down, I don't have
gotten a
questions.
response. We have tried. Yeah. Contacting the coroner, have not gotten a response, and we tried every way other than appearing at the funeral home or morgue door, but personal phones, emails, other mail, we just have not gotten any response, frankly. We'll keep trying.
Okay.
All right, for the committee, if I may, what we have, the next scheduled meeting, we're carving out a series of half-day meetings through next week and beyond if needed. The next one is scheduled for 1:30 on Monday. And during that meeting and the ones beyond that, we're looking to do two things. First of all, we still have the sheriff and the probate judge to schedule a specific meeting and time. We'll get those on. Other than that, from this point on, we have all the county departments from the general fund as well as fire. And we will put them in one long agenda is what you'll see, a list of them just for the order, not implying that we're planning to get through them all in one session. But the idea is not knowing how slow or fast the committee wants to move, depending what they see at that point. And this format actually lends itself to everyone being on call because they can be watching from where they're working. And we will go through the agenda in that order with the page numbers for all the county departments, as well as the probate judge and the sheriff. And with that, Eric, anything else to cover this morning?
Yeah, throw it. So, I heard some interest at the beginning about looking at, we can certainly ask organizations to look at where they would make cuts. I mean, we started out with a small gap that's manageable, but if we want to try to bring the budget in at a lower amount, we can certainly have people start to look at where they would propose cuts in order to free up some money. A couple of things that I just wanted to throw out for you to think about and maybe give us some feedback at the next meeting is there's some structural changes that we could do. So when we talked about the sheriff and we haven't had the sheriff in yet, but one option there is whether they, at least in the short term, buy more of their vehicles out of SPLOST and free up some general revenue. It just means that they'll run through the SPLOST earlier and they may need more general revenue money for vehicles later, but that's something you can shift around. There's some personnel costs that you could shift to SPLOST as well. You know, if we have an outside vendor working on a road project, you typically charge them to the road project, but we tend to charge John's staff to operating funds. And so that's something that's an opportunity to consider. Obviously, the SPLOST money doesn't go as far, but we have you've engaged a consultant look at your transportation impact fees. And when that's done, you're gonna have to look at where the economy is and what you think the ability is to deal with that. But the one thing I will tell you is Dave looked at what's happened with our tax digest. And Dave, let me know if I get this wrong, but
I got it here.
We were looking at a 70-30 split between residential and non-residential, but it's actually gotten even more residential. So is it up to 72% residential and 28% non-res, or did I misremember that?
That's correct.
So, you know, when we look at whether increasing impact fees is scaring off development, we actually have had stronger growth in the residential side over the last year. And that's despite, you know, the threats from people that no one's going to build because we want to have quality construction here in our community with residential design standards and overlays and other things. So, you know, I think consider whether, you know, you'd like to shift some of our personnel into funding out of capital dollars, like the road projects that we're going into. And we just awarded one. We've got another one that is coming to us, the 369. One thing that you,
Eric, isn't that a kind of a dangerous trend though to start?
I agree.
I
agree.
Yeah.
I think it's very dangerous.
So the one option we have is, do we use more of Atlas and charge them to the projects, or do we use staff and charge them to tax dollars? I mean, Atlas is being charged to the projects today.
Yeah, but you don't want to start putting more and more operating cost into SPLOST.
No.
Well,
I-
That can go away.
the key is if we need more staff to manage large projects, you know, we talked about this, Commissioner, the other day, you know, why do we have $100 million worth of road projects from the transportation bond that we're just starting to get into? It's because we didn't either staff up to do it and charge those staff to the projects before the cost of the projects went up, or alternately, and every community decides how much to do in-house or not. But the alternative would have been to have, you know, it wasn't named Atlas at the time, but to have more outside contractors. If you want to push the projects, we need to have the resources to push the projects, and whether that's in-house or contracted, that's a great policy decision for the board. You know, Sharon Springs, excuse me, I'll get it right. Sandy Springs contracted just about everything out. They brought most of their staff in-house. But that's a policy decision. I mean, if you.
Oh, I definitely agree with you that when this bond is nearing completion, we have got to take a step back and look at it and see, let's look at the timelines. Let's look at, what we did right, what we did wrong, if we had bid them all up front, how much money we could have saved, you know, if we had gotten more prepared. But also, was that part of the money flow? And I kept hearing, we don't want to bond, but the first 100 million. We don't want to bond all of it at one time, but we need to look at how much did that save us doing it that way, or did it really cost us doing it that way? Because if we ever want to do another bond ever for transportation, we got to look at what we've done right and wrong on the one we've just finished.
And it would be a combination of both. I mean, there are things that we did right, and you want to replicate those, and things that we could have done differently. And it's always easier to look back after the fact, but.
And Eric, I think it's also, we've got to look at each component of it, not just a big view, but get down into it and look at right-of-way acquisition. How long did it take us to do the right-of-way acquisition? And was it because we had, you know, an outside attorney, or was it because that we had not enough people working on the right-of-way acquisition and one person was not enough? Should we have, divvied up more of the responsibility? There is a lot of things that we need to look at with this bond. I mean, I believe, and I'm just a comment, you mentioned about going to the different departments. Before we do that, I think that Dave and you need to take a hard look at the budget and where can we get the needed. If we did 5% cut, that's $7.5 million. I mean, if the sheriff, you know, if we're able to get him to 2 million of that, where do we find the other? Is that in modifying the raises? Is that modifying the amount of the raise? Or where can we do it from a lot of different areas? How much would it benefit us if we were to do on our vehicles, you know, of raising it to that 125 threshold? You know, I think before we go to, my opinion, before we start going to the departments, y'all need to look at the overall budget and where you might get close to that 7.5 million reduction without having to go to them.
Yeah, well, I think the key, well, I don't disagree with you. I think that the challenge is they know what, they're the boots on the ground and know what they're spending the money on. The one thing that we probably don't want to do is if we tighten up, and so think back to Matthew Ledbetter, the $36,000 that he's absorbing. We have a history of being conservative in the budget, both with revenues and expenditures, and then there's money left at the end of the year. If you tighten up at the front end, the key is you won't have that money at the end of the year because there's money that's in budgets that doesn't get spent. There's conservative revenue estimates that result in money at the end of the year. So what we need to do if we look at cutting back is cutting back on what people actually will spend and finding a way for them not to spend that. That's where you have real savings, and we can certainly do that. And you know, one thing with vehicles is we've upgraded the vehicles. The next step in that process is you start reducing the size of the fleet. If you have reliable vehicles, they're not in the shop as much. There's not as much downtime. You don't need as many spares. And so one of the things that we can do is to look at how many vehicles we don't need and sell them off. And we get some cash by selling them, but we also avoid keeping a lot of vehicles in repair, and the older they are, the more expensive they are to repair. So that's something that we can look at too. Definitely need to look at compensation. That's an across the board. But anything else that any of you think of between now and the next meeting, we'll go in and look. And I think that you heard, we don't want to scare people about the state budget until we get better information, but that's going to start to come out fairly quickly in terms of the agencies figuring out where they can comply with the governor's request.
I think that one way we can make a good impact maybe is to look at the number of employees requests, new employees being hired. And that's a way that you can keep some of the money internal and then ask them if we could, if everything works out, then they could come back and request it later.
Yeah, and that's where I think Dave and I were is, you know, we've got that list of requests. but I would suggest that you want to be much closer to budget adoption in October before you start to say yes to some of those. The last thing you want to do is to move forward with something that you discover you can't afford. The other thing we can do is look at slowing down filling some of the positions. Every day a position is vacant saves a little bit of money, offset some of the revenue that we're not going to see, or some of the money that we're spending on PPE that we didn't expect to spend, but I agree.
Eric?
Yes.
I'm back. You're good. I'm back. Get disconnected again. One thing, important thing for the committee to keep in mind right now, or through this series of meetings, is while we have time to adopt the budget up to October or later in the year, the one thing the board does need to do is to levy the millage rate in July. So, as of right now, we're looking at the same millage rate as we've had before, but that's, we need a recommendation from the committee to the full board to see what the board wants to do, not just what we've dropped in this continuation budget. So the millage rate is something we need to get before the board in June to advertise and act on in July. And so I just want to open that up to the committee for their thoughts and input, which we always do in our first finance committee meeting every year, is ask about the millage rate. So, any input on that?
No.
Where I stand on it at this point, okay? And that is, I realize bottom line, there was not an increase, so to speak, but we did go up last year. Anything that we can do to keep from raising that millage rate, I think we need to do. If anything, we need to try to decrease in this budget. I know it's a hard time, I understand that, but we're making some changes that may very well be quite cost savings that we've never done before, which is folks working from home. So we may find that that has got an effect that flows over in other ways as well. Little things like the supplies, various things that is going to be less whenever you have folks that are not coming into the office every day. So a number of folks, not everyone, but a number of folks. So I know we're kind of like, this is a year of revamping and re-looking at things, but as I stand right now, today, this is not in stone, but as it stands right now, anything that we can do to avoid raising that millage rate, that's the direction I want us to go.
Yeah.
I agree. Dave, we lowered the millage 2 years ago. Can you recalculate based on debt obligations in the new tax digest to see if there's any capacity on the debt millage to lower it?
Yeah, we'll look at that. We may be able to, but again, we'll do that cautiously. We don't want to have to go back up on it again in 2 or 3 years because the values have dropped. So, but right, our debt millage is in good shape because we know exactly what the cost is for those bonds. So we can fine tune that well.
And Eric was on this call yesterday, and that was with the Economic Development Group and Economic Committee. And something that stood out to me, learned that both of those car dealerships, the Audi and the Cadillac, they're not going to be coming in. And I never really did hear why they're not coming in. But, and that was going to be a good bit for us as far as revenue goes. Both those dealerships are going to be bringing us some revenue. So with this tax digest, I would like to find out what made them change their mind. And if that's happening with others, because it cannot have anything to do with impact fees.
Yeah.
That cannot be, because it's not even there at this point. So why did we lose both of those?
That's a good point.
Yep. Well, for now, we'll keep the millage rate the same, keep working with what we get digest numbers on. I wrote down from what Commissioner Mills said at the beginning of the meeting, amount we are to budget to. I mean, this is going to be revenue side driven. We're looking at an extremely downside revenue with the recession. So we'll keep that total revenue number before us and then see where you want to bring in the expenditure side. Again, if the expenditure side you can bring in below that, that's fine. I'm not saying we should budget all the way up to the total revenues. But if we can bring it in below that, that's fine. But the difference, you might want to put in a reserve, right? Commissioner Mills, and a reserve, which is set aside until we see how things are going or what it may mean for next year. Carryover.
Yeah, and then if we don't need it, we can put it in our capital projects to help pay for the, these park overages or this admin building or
Right.
admin land purchase, for different things. There's a bunch of demand for the dollars.
Right. And
Agreed.
it is those transfers that are funding the admin building, if you will. So we have to keep an eye on that.
Hey, thank you.
Okay.
When is the next meeting? What's
Monday at
scheduled for the next-
1:30.
I'm sorry?
Monday at 1:30. It's an afternoon meeting. We're carving out a series of half-day meetings, either mornings or afternoon, depending how your 3 calendars are.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
I think this is a better timeline. We hit a lot of organizations today, but it would get tiring if we tried to go through the day, so.
No, that's half a
Appreciate
day.
the suggestion to break it up and extend it out.
And again, we'll list all of our departments, but that doesn't mean we expect to get through them all in a half day. We just want them there because we don't know what pace we'll go through them.
And we have all that detail in the packet that you sent out last
Yeah.
week, so we have.
It's
the
already there.
opportunity.
Right. All the details already there for the whole
Okay.
budget and track
But you
one
have the
budget.
sequence of departments so that we know kind of which ones will come first?
Yeah, we've got a list of those. I mean, for our departments, so basically, I think be in the order of the package. We're going to try to go through them in order. We just had to pull out the elected officials and
Okay.
so on.
Anything else anyone wants to cover today?
Stay safe.
Is there a motion to adjourn the finance committee meeting?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Thank
everybody.
y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.